Today I sat down with John Robison. John is an entrepreneur, investor, and a super connector. He has the pulse of how the right wing is moving. As you'll hear, he doesn't hide his feelings, and he gives us a rare insight into how things actually work. John and I discuss how he grew up gay in Texas, the intolerance towards right-wing views in Hollywood, how he reconciles being right-wing with being gay, some of the shady characters that got caught up in the Me Too movement, and how being gay has changed in his lifetime. We also dig into his relationship with Trump, how Trump won against Hillary, lost against Biden, and the future of education in Texas. I, for one, am very interested to see what happens with the fledgling University of Austin. Without delay, let's jump into my conversation with John Robison. Hello and welcome to the RSnake Show. Today I have with me John Robison. How are you, sir?
I am fantastic. Thank you.
John and I have been friends for quite a while, and I think you're a very interesting guest for all kinds of reasons. So I don't think we're going to get to everything because you are just this sea of interesting stories and things. And I just
Forrest Gump.
Yeah, exactly. You can sit on the bench with you for hours and hours and leave and then come back and it's still going. Yeah.
Like I said, I still question your judgment.
So I wanted to tell a little story about how we met because I just think this is a really hilarious intro. So I met you around the exact same time I met a very good friend of mine, JD Cameron, whose real name is John David Cameron. So some people call him John, some people call him JD, but when I didn't know him very well, I had him in my phone as just John. Partly from a security perspective because, he's a famous guy and, famous family. But also partly, I think, just because I was doing it quickly. Around the same time I met you, I don't know if it was before or after, but right around the same time through a guy named Joe Sabatino, who's actually the same way I met Krista Beck. So this is kind of a
Joe
weird...
Sabatino.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so I was texting John and I was texting John. So in my head, I had two Johns and I thought I had them correct. I've never done this since or before, but I got them mixed up. I was texting you thinking you were JD and I was texting him as if it was you. So I'm having these long conversations about we should hang out and blah, 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 thinking it's you. And you would never show up ever when I was like, we're going to the bar. Let's go hang out or whatever. But when I texted your partner, husband, Jason, you guys would show up. And I'm like, well, I guess that's just how it works. I just make sure I always let him know because then you guys, sometimes you'll show up. And so it's all messed up.
The truth is I never gave you my real number.
So I'm texting him like crazy about hanging out all the time, from his, which is a bit odd because he's in another state at this point. He's in California. We're in Texas. And so at one point I'm like, I'm at your favorite bar, thinking I was talking about your favorite bar. And he's like, oh, you're in Calabasas? Great. I'll be right down. And I'm like, no. Which makes sense, by the way, because you used to live in LA. And so that all made sense in this weird way. And I'm like, totally,
I Love Lucy moment. It just didn't click.
And then I forget, at some point it all just kind of something someone said. I'm like, oh my God, I had this all backwards. And this had been a multi-month long conversation with the two of you. And it all made perfect sense. Like every line made absolutely perfect sense. And I had just completely made it backwards. So as a result, JD was really amped up to have a drink with me. He's like, oh, I'm going to fly out to Austin. Let's just do this. Let's go have a drink.
I forgot. Oh my God.
So he flies out. And he shows up with Seamus Blackley, who's the inventor of the Xbox. And he shows up on Rainy Street. And he's in a 3-piece suit in the dead of summer. And I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I'm supposed to meet some guy. And I'm like, yeah, you're supposed to meet me. And he's like, no. I'm supposed to meet some guy, some business guy. I don't know him, but you know him. I'm like, you're here to hang out with me. That's as far as I'm like, there's something like really messed up here. And so he's like, no. He's like, hold on. So he has some admin. So he's like texting her and we're at the bar and he's like, it's a guy named John Robison. I'm like, what? I'm like, did I screw up again? Did I mess this whole thing up? And sure enough, you walk through the door and I had this look of sort of panic. I'm sure, I don't know if you remember my face, but I'm like, what is going on? How did this all happen? Well, it turns out Joe Sabatino had found out through me and let them know, oh, you should meet John while he's in town. So this all actually did make sense there because he's the connective tissue between me and them. So we go out to dinner that night, and he starts telling these old war stories and interesting stuff. And one of the stories he tells is about this. He has got this lifelong passion for space, which if you see around, we have some iconic space pieces around. But he had this long-term sort of love affair with space, and they threw this big party. I forget, for maybe Carl Sagan or something. I can't remember who it was. And he met Buzz Aldrin, who he apparently had met a couple times before, and he's like, oh. So they ended up becoming friends, and he said, Buzz, one thing you never did, you did a world tour and you visited every country with the exception of Brazil. I don't know why. There was something, it got messed up somewhere in the schedule or something, and he ended up not making that one particular stop. And he's like, why don't we do a tour? Why don't you and I go on tour and go down to Brazil and do this big thing and, spend a couple weeks down there? And Buzz loved the idea. He's like, yeah, let's do it. So they become fast friends, and they're talking and, flying all over the place with each other, having great food and staying in crazy places, and, great stories. But part of it was, he's like, what do you do with those naysayers? He's like, oh, they're the worst. Like, I never been to the moon. this doesn't exist. And he's just all upset about it. And he's like, you know what, Buzz? You know what you should do? Just hit him. Just go up and just hit him. And he's like, what? What are you talking about? Like, I'm a distinguished person. I'm somebody. I probably shouldn't. Probably shouldn't do that. And he's like, Buzz, you went to the moon. There is no one on Earth who's going to convict you of punching someone for saying you didn't go to the moon. And so fast forward a couple of months, they're back or whatever. And he gets a call from Buzz. He's like, oh, it happened. I actually punched somebody. He's like, you did what? And so he went off.
I was there.
And he punched the guy. And so then he was in courtroom with him, and like, it was this big to do. Effectively, he just got he's like, the judge just wasn't having it. He's like, this guy's just asking for it, this paparazzi. So JD tells this whole story, and then you tell your version of the story.
So at the time I officed, kind of by the Pretty Woman Hotel. I officed at Wilshire and between Rodeo and Cameron, and by the grill in the alley. And I could see out my corner window in my office everything going on Rodeo Drive and Wilshire and that whole corner. And I would take my walks. And it was about that time I was looking, and normal paparazzi, normal people, but I saw some people gathering. There was this little kind of boutique hotel down there. And I went out my office. I'm walking around, and I come across, and there's a crowd, and I get there just as this paparazzi guy is screaming something at this older guy. And I'm like, I grew up in Houston. I knew all the astronauts, da-da-da-da-da. I'm like, well, that's Buzz Aldrin. And Buzz was with his then wife, and they're coming out somewhere, and these guys surround him. And the guy gets up, and Buzz said something, and the guy goes, what are you going to do, hit me? And Buzz just, he's 75 years old or what. I'm like going, oh my God. And then I just watch him, and here's Buzz Aldrin. And I wish, we had cell phones of the day. I'd have done that in slow motion. And Buzz with I'm no MMA fighter, but that was a pretty damn good punch. And this guy, I'm sitting there going, good God, he knocked the guy off his feet onto the ground. And he said something. I couldn't hear him. I think later on he said something like, it was like, he goes, you're at the moon yourself now, or something like that. He was like, he goes, don't ever da-da-da. He was just yelling at him. And it was almost exactly what you later then said JD had told him to say.
Yeah. And so this whole thing happened, and you started telling this story not having heard our story, because you just heard the word Buzz. It's like, oh, I've got a good Buzz Aldrin story. Right.
That's funny.
It has a very weirdly small world.
He knocked him down and knocked him. He fell over, and people started applauding.
I bet.
That was the other thing I found interesting, and Buzz they just took off. He wasn't sticking around, I think. But I remember that. I remember that time. I remember meeting JD. The rest him.
Yeah,
so he was quite a guy. I remember that evening.
Kind of shows what sort of impact JD had on people's lives, and in little ways that you can hardly anticipate how crazy they're going to be down the road. But
I guess glad he didn't tell me to hit someone. Not a very good fighter. You know?
So you actually you're kind of an entrepreneur and a venture capitalist, and have been anyway, producer. Like, why don't you tell us a little bit about sort of the kind of how you got from out to LA and then back again? I think that would be useful, and then we can dig into some of your earlier life stuff after that.
I could do it with that Ted Baxter. That ages me, but it all started in a 5,000 watt radio station in Fresno, California.
I think this is actually quite important for the rest of the stuff we're going to be talking about. So normally I would kind of skip over people's backgrounds because I don't find them that interesting. But if it's relevant to the conversation, in this case, I think it is. It's worth doing.
My mother's always been important to me. I lost my father when I was very young. He died of cancer, my natural father, and when I was like 8 years old. And my mother was, I would say, brilliant in so many ways, but she had to, she was 31, very pretty, 3 kids, one less than a year old, and she had to go, and her husband died suddenly and had just started making money, and we had a big house and all this stuff, but no real savings and stuff at that point. But she went and created a career. But she did something interesting in that she noticed what each of my brother and myself, and even later my sister, just a year old, but she would figure out what we liked and what we were interested in. And she saw that I had an interest in content, in storytelling, but she also saw that I had a knack for imitating people, and they would make me imitate starting with Jimmy Carter and all that. She was always pushing me to do more of that, and as I got older, I found some business, and as much as I started collecting hubcaps in Houston off the side of the road, and in the ditches and the humidity of Houston. We lived in a nice area. There was, back in that time, the cars had hubcaps, not rims. And I ended up with 3 of them in the garage. And some of the men in the neighborhood would come. My mother was very pretty. They were over, trying to find their ways to, but they became mentors and business people of mine. And I found I like business and I like stories.
Just to round that out. So they came over to meet your mom and get their hubcaps back.
No. They came over to meet my mom. The hubcaps to them were inconsequential. Turned it around. The one that ultimately won her was the smartest because they told me, one of them, these are guys that were big business. One of them founded Cisco Foods. One of them, these are some interesting guys, but they were just coming down and helping the young widow with their kids. We lived in a nice area, and it was kind of an interesting time for back in the 70s. And so one of them tells me, after I have 300 hubcaps in the garage, my wife loses those things all the time, and you ought to go up to a little gourmet grocery store. You ought to sell those things. Well, I could do that. But my friends that helped me get them out of the ditch were terrified of selling. But they would start teaching me business. And then I noticed a couple of things happen. There's a lot of stories with that. But I learned how to sell them. I learned how to, I wasn't, in some van we lived in a nice house right down the street. I was a little redheaded kid on my bike. They would follow me down. I would sell them a hubcap. I was selling 3, 4, 5 a day, making $8, $10, $12 a day in the 70s. $100 a day in the 70s. So these men would start telling me, what are you doing with your money? I said, well, I'm going to buy a Z28. Well, don't buy the car with that money. Buy it with. And so the storytelling for me was how I would approach the ladies in the car to tell them and convince them to come down. So I would learn all of that. And my mother noticed how fun that was. And then these men started helping, and it was kind of storytelling to them too. One of them figured out that my favorite hubcap was Cadillac spokes, because they went across the whole line of Cadillacs and multiple years. So I could sell them a lot. And so this guy, who ultimately became my stepfather, was the smartest of all of them. He would show up every, I don't know, week or two with a Cadillac spoke for me. And that was his way to get. And later on, before he died of Alzheimer's, we had a conversation, and he said, I asked him about the Cadillac spokes, and he goes, I said, how did you find so many of them? He goes, you idiot.
Just bought a bunch.
Because I knew I was in love with your mother, and that's who I was going to marry. And I sent my assistant down to McGinnis Cadillac and bought 50 of the damn things. You know? And so he'd pay 50 for a hubcap. I sold for 10 or whatever. Anyway, I got to invest in their stocks when I was young. And by the time I was out of college in 1985, that was worth something. Southwest Airlines, some of those had taken off, Cisco Foods. And so it gave me a little bit of an advantage, but I knew I liked business and I liked the storytelling. I liked that, but I was trying to find a way, and I didn't think I'd look like the leading man actor, and I didn't want to go do all of that stuff. So I was finding a way to be involved in storytelling and content. And my mom was very big in education, and I started off with educational content. And I started off with everything from leadership and training and psychological profile, content that had to do all up and down the line there, that wasn't K-12 education, but it was education, business education, all of that type of stuff. And I worked for a mentor, and I rolled up companies. So I learned how to buy companies. I learned entrepreneurship. I learned venture capital. But to me, it was always about content. Content is a place to go and a reason to go there. And then, to me, a natural correlation or a natural subset of that was the delivery of it, which is ever changing. Content is here, and it's a place to go and a reason to go there. But whether it was albums, then cassette tapes, then DVDs, then MP3s, that you see the evolution of how content is played and distributed. I started looking at how you might do such things, and we got into some technologies. But at the same time, as I was looking at that, and I was looking at those technologies, I went to work for a mentor. I bought and sold companies for him. And then I said, your content that we've rolled up is great, but your delivery is not. I need to build us, before the internet, a satellite training network. He said, you do it. I'm too old. And I went out on my own. He was my first investor. And I ended up teaming with a couple of folks, and we built a little satellite network and then we ran into the teachers unions and problems and so we instead started doing it for car dealers to train their service people without sending them to Dearborn, putting a dish on top and doing everything, and then packaged that up and sold it as Auto Dealer Training Network or whatever it was, and got out of it because the internet was coming up. Mm-hmm. And so I saw the internet as a golden opportunity. At the same time, I had switched teams. I married a Baylor girl, and I say that'll turn a lot of people gay just because of the shoes. But we can edit that later. But as I was looking at it, that was what led to also getting into entertainment content. And so in Dallas, I teamed up, and cable channels were just coming online, big cable. So there's, like now, an insatiable appetite for content. Okay. I had an interest in it. I had a business interest in it, but I didn't want to put myself out on the line personally as the creative. I didn't have the confidence in that. So I hid behind the business, which I was more comfortable with. But as we did that, we started doing knockoff films. It was Region Entertainment, but knockoff. Twister would come out, and we'd make Storm Chaser with C actors and then sell it to the cable, and then make Lifetime Network movie, and then bad horror films. But other stuff started coming to me at that point, and I really had encouragement and wanted to also be able to tell stories. But I was conflicted because on one hand, we were starting to do capital and venture capital and technology. And on the other hand, I was interested in content and more so in entertainment content. But the only thing worse than a Vegas credit line was to be investing in films if you're also running a VC fund. Mm-hmm. That wasn't at the time seen as even remotely wise.
Right. Yeah.
And so we had
the ROI just isn't.
we had conflicts of how, but I had learned how you actually make money in the business and you know, and what a gross corridor is. You know, most people don't understand that, and what distribution means and how you get it and all of that stuff. So as I was coming out, I looked at moving. I divorced, and I said I need to go into, you know, Mecca for gay. I didn't want to go to San Francisco. I was more interested in the convergence of content and technology than they were at the time up there. And I found myself in an investor in a company called Load Media at the time, and it took me out there, which was a happy medium between entertainment content and aggregate. And it was pre-caching content back over a 28.8 modem. You could play full frame video, which streaming, as you know, you couldn't. It was just choppy. You couldn't do it. And it gave me a way or an excuse to go out to California and to West Hollywood and in search of gay Mecca and to meet my creativity goals and find a way to succeed in content and technology out there.
So you, one of the things you invested in was Usual Suspects, which happens to be one of my absolute top favorite movies. But in hindsight, it's got some big kind of pockmarks on it reputationally. Bryan Singer and Kevin Spacey. I mean, you were around some pretty interesting folks. like how do you think about that in retrospect?
And the senator, while insisting he was not intoxicated, could not explain his nudity. That was from my favorite WKRP. Yeah, well, Hollywood has generations and history of demons and people that think they're above the law and over entitled and this, that, and the other. And I had made some money, and I was, looking to find my place, and I got kind of hooked up with the cool kids in the gay community in Hollywood, and in doing so, it's not something I'm particularly proud of.
I wouldn't suspect so, but also...
Well, I mean, I'm proud of some of the stuff...
It's part of you.
I was able to do, but I wasn't proud of the fact that I went against my upbringing and what I knew. And I just wanted to be one of the cool kids. So I got in there. I had a big target on my back, and, I was probably talking bigger than I was. I was probably doing this and doing that, but I had a lot of them come at me, and I was putting money into a lot of ridiculous things and being taken advantage of. But also, I ended up with a great house. I was going to tear down the house, so I didn't care what happened to it. Mm-hmm. It was on 3 acres on Mulholland.
All right.
Great house. A great yard, and a house that was modern but in needing of being scraped. So I didn't care what happened. So I'd have big parties, and I mean, Halloween parties were over the top. My birthday party, which coincides with the Golden Globes, accidentally became a big Golden Globes after party because of my assistant sending birthday invitations out, and Ian McKellen was up for one, and some other. All of a sudden, all of this stuff started happening, and all these people start showing up after the Golden Globes to a party at my house, which we had booze for 50 people, and all of a sudden, it's one of those things, and then it just became a tradition. But in that world, I guess became in the gay mafia, if you want to look at what that is, and everyone shows up into Hollywood. We did things with the headshot photographers. I don't generally even say any of this stuff. It's not something I'm particularly proud of, but they would bring the...
Only say what you're comfortable with.
They would bring, we had a group of us that are some names that are relatively large, and we would have a dinner, and they would bring, and we would be able to meet, just like the old days of Hollywood they would do. Well, the gay community was doing the same thing. So then they would be invited to parties, and we would be able to meet them, and some of them thought they were going to be the next the rumors, the Keanu Reeves or the Tom Cruises and all those rumors that fly. But they weren't. If they were there, the lawyers were looking, they weren't going to get anywhere, And so I didn't like it. And then there was one day, there was one of those parties, there was a guy who went on to win an Oscar. He was a good actor, but a great writer. And we were at a big party at my house, and I just said, no, you don't have to do that. If you want to ask me out on a date, you do it regular, like, you know. And it was at that point, after 2 years of being in with that group, and some of the things that I just avoid legal stuff, but some of the things that you would read about people like Singer and some of that stuff happened at my house, and I had to get rid of it. And I had a big knockdown, drag out fight with him at one point that ended any of our relationship because of that stuff. And I made a horrible joke. I said, it says valet, not parental drop off. Get the hell out of here. And that caused me a lot of problems after that.
I can imagine.
I mean, because
puts you on the right side of the whole thing after it's all said and done, though.
Yeah, but I mean, I just don't ever talk about it. I don't. I don't want to get sued all the time because. But I didn't play that. I didn't play that game, and luckily, I mean, I had 2 years, and some of it was fun. But there were things that caught my attention, and
this shouldn't have been a surprise to anybody. I mean, I've never met either of them, so I don't have any specific examples on my side. But I've known people who've been at conferences where Kevin Spacey was like a guest speaker, for instance, and he was very open about what he wanted and with whom, and very predatorial. And it was, I mean, and I'm 4 degrees of separation from that person. And it was very clear to me from where I'm sitting here in Austin, Texas, and this happened in Germany, what was going on.
Kevin didn't work with Bryan Singer again until Superman.
That one Superman.
Okay.
Not his finest works.
Legendary's first movie, and almost, I think, chased Thomas Tull out of the business. But he didn't work with him, and the reason was he was what you said. Kevin, although he wasn't out, he made it very, very clear. But he was also mean and vengeful in some ways. I didn't even know any of this was going on back during the filming of that movie, but he ended up doing something and maybe trying to take Brian's boyfriend, or just little things like that, which he apparently did again on the Superman set and caused all kinds of friction. But yeah, he was that. But I got an awakening and told about I just said, I don't like that, whether it's straight or gay or this or that. If that's what the business is, I don't.
How prevalent do you think it was, out of curiosity? If you were to name the top, 100 actors and actresses, how many of them have had to do, bad things to get to where they are, do you think? Just, based on your gut feel. Or direct knowledge if you have it.
Some of them, there's always the bad movies that they make, but those are generally as a result of development deals that get them locked up. So when the studio gets enough money in it, then they just have to make the piece of junk. So, but no, I mean, bad things they've done like that. Harvey.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a dominant player, and now that's all public. So there is a number of those people like that. And there are a lot of horror stories about that. I know horrible things that a few have had to do.
A-list celebrities. People would actually know the name.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I know several occasions of things that people that are good friends, and things that would come out, and things that certain directors and certain people would do, because there's this over-entitlement. There's this sense of, what are you going to do about it?
You still want the job, don't you? You want to be famous, right?
It's just like, hey, they're willing to throw it all down, get on the bus. Everyone told them they were the prettiest girl or prettiest guy in high school. Go out, you need to be an actor. And they go out, and then they find out what it's about, and then they have a choice to make, because these things happen and these things are done. And I'm sad to say, they're, even in this environment where we are now, there's still little pockets of the world over there that just doesn't understand you can't do that. So now, more so, and I'm not a fan of lawyers all the time, but I think, when you get into the fact that certain people, if they can't get bonding, they can't get bonded if they have those types of problems. More and more, there's other checks and balances.
That's good.
To it, and then also people, cell phones, the ability to. I mean, it's just too easy to entrap people.
And the Me Too movement, I'm sure.
Well, all of that stuff that came from it, but I mean, the thing that gets these people is when all of a sudden they get blackmailed by someone comes in and says, "You did this to me to get the role. I'm going to put it back on you. If I don't get it, this is going out, and how much is your divorce going to cost?" It to me, that's
it's pretty gross.
Yeah, but you've got that kind of a supply and demand, and when you've got those few of people making the decisions over something that can make the difference between you living an extraordinary life and an ordinary one, and you've been working 5 years as a waiter, and you've done all of this stuff where you're like, I either got to go home with my tail between my legs, or some that just go out there ready, willing, and able to do it. Mm-hmm. And then they throw themselves, at the folks. And so,
and that's a feedback loop. Now it sort of feels like that's how you do it in this industry. That's how I got my role. It was by sleeping my way to the top or whatever.
Yeah, and people didn't talk about it. But the gay community being, if you want to see kind of a metaphor in a way for the gay mafia, go watch, and oddly enough, coincidentally, Kevin Spacey in Swimming with Sharks, which was the assistants basically in taking over and trapping, and that was basically how the gay mafia, the say Geffens and Dillers of the world, rose up to prominence, was because they controlled access. They were the assistants, and then they worked their ways up, and then they banded together and made things happen. But those types of things aren't what that industry is about to me. It's the part of the industry that disgusts me. Mm-hmm. It was fool's gold. It was kind of fun to play for a little bit, but in reality, what I like is good business and good stories that you can, it's like stories you can be involved in. It's like cutting the grass. It's immediate gratification, but then it gets to live on in a library. And hopefully if you're starting to tell stories that matter, and if you realize now in my life how powerful the medium is as an ability to shape and help, in pop culture and help, I think it's more important than ever that the stories be authentic and that's where we are right now. Is how do we change some of the direction of some of the stories that are being required to be bought in Hollywood that are doing damage to society? How do we do that? And I think the new Top Gun is a prime example.
Yeah, that was a great movie.
It's just not at all about. It doesn't check any of the woke boxes. It
also is a very cheesy, silly, fun, campy type movie that we all grew up with. It's exactly fits the bill of exactly what you wanted to see when you were 12 or whatever. So,
but the 12-year-olds in all of us right now are mad enough that we want that stuff. We want messages of liberty, but we also want redemption. We want people to rise above their conflicts and conquer. We want, movies like Seabiscuit in the past, where it's contrary to, where the rich guy's not always bad,
because there is balance
flawed
there,
and there's this and there's that, but people are able to be seen as whole people and come out, and there's
with their flaws and their
right
good parts.
And when you see that sometimes the very thing that's a flaw later becomes the very thing that's a strength. Like in Seabiscuit, I just love that story, because if you think about it, they're salesmen and everything, but everyone hates the car salesman. So here's a guy at the beginning of automobiles who went from horses to cars. He's selling cars, and he becomes very good at it. But he's selling cars as a vehicle to the future and as your dreams, and and you just see that in him, and part of you like, eh. And then he gets very successful, and then his young son dies from the very thing that he's selling out on their ranch. And then he has to go and find solace. His wife leaves him, everything happens, and he goes and he starts finding solace, oddly enough, in a horse. and he brings together a broken man and a bad broken rider, and he puts this group together. But this horse, everyone's kind of fixing each other. But there's this point in it when that horse is successful, and he's trying to sell the track owner in California on having a stakes race that is 10 times the amount of purse that has ever been done. And this guy's not buying it. It's Santa Anita, the track. He's not buying it. And he sells them on the infield being filling up and the access for people that have never been into a race and that are going to grow up coming all the time. Blah, blah, blah. He does all that, from the sale of merchandise to everything. He makes the whole case. Finally, he gets the guy to, it was 100,000 back then. It was a lot. And as he's walking out, the track owner says, "Do you sell cars that way?" And Jeff Bridges, his character, he turns around, he looks at me, he goes, "Thousands of them." And it's at that point that you realize that you don't hate this car salesman, but you love the very way it's that talent that brought him to the point to be able to bring this thing together and to make. I love stories like that.
So you are actually, have owned a production studio, are building some stuff out. I don't know how much you're willing to talk about that, but you're actually building studio space. And
we were in California and starting to figure out what we wanted. Rick Perry had delivered I've said this in the press before, but he had delivered a really good pitch, which was I was actually building studios and doing some stuff in China at the time, and that's another story how that even happened. Thanks to Al Ruddy and Dr. Robert Mundell putting the Grumpy Old Men together, Nobel economist, Oscar-winning producer. And they both wanted to talk, and then everything, and Robert Mundell in China, and all of a sudden I'm doing stuff in China. Well, I did it, and I didn't like it. And Rick Perry says, "Why are you doing that there? Come back home to Texas." But his pitch was funny. It's the creativity of L.A., technology of San Francisco, nice people, no state income tax, and your mama's here.
Oh.
So that was a great elevator pitch. But what happened?
Does he sell thousands of cars too?
He sold thousands of boats, but and he sold a lot of people on moving here.
Mm-hmm. Sure,
he
did.
stole a lot of jobs.
Yeah, he did.
But he created a great environment, and the state did everything they said. So I came here and I started exploring in East Austin, and I said I wanted to test it. I wanted to see what was going on, and I felt like I'd been involved with the studio in L.A. at Old Hollywood Center, an old 11 soundstage. It had been Howard Hughes's. It had been Coppola's. I was in the middle of Old Hollywood, so I understood the manufacturing facilities of a film. But coming to Texas, I started looking at it, and I said, if you want to be in the manufacturing business, you got to have manufacturing facilities. And Texas was a great location shoot, but there are no real purpose-built studios here. Everyone looks at the incentives and all that, and there's some, I think, there's some interesting stuff to talk about on how we might some changes that might happen. Hollywood may be a surprise. It may not be as blue as you think. Mm-hmm. There's a whole nother discussion on that, but we can talk about. But history-wise, I said we've got to have manufacturing facilities. I just didn't know if that was just too crazy or not. And so we found a little studio that had some sound stages, and I was interested in Austin moving east. Everyone was going north and west. No one had gone east. And you have a river. Mm-hmm. I'm like, why isn't anyone doing this? And so we started looking at that and found a studio and did a deal. I had a partner, and we went and we took over a studio there and started testing the market, hired a fantastic gal as president, and went to see, all right, let's just see what we can do. Now, the sound stages, there were only 4 of them, 3 really, weren't big enough to do big films or really even TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
But you could do independents, commercials, and a lot of stuff. So the risk was relatively low. But we went into that to see what we could do. And in 2.5 year period of time, did 144 productions. And Bastrop started becoming the county kind of, we had some politicians that helped and became kind of the film capital.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're in the middle of some stuff. I had a partner that didn't share the same goals as to how big this needed to be and this, that, and the other. And so right about that time, COVID comes on. So I had proven that there's a market for it, but I couldn't do that business the way it was with that little production facility.
With that team.
We need more. We need, we need, if this is going to be done, you can't crawl, walk, run. You got to jump all in. And we need at least 17 massive stages. You got 30,000 foot stages per show if you're going to be doing plus. We got to change some of the stuff, the way the incentives work. There's a lot of stuff that has to be done, but you've got to build it. Somebody's got to be stupid enough to build it. And so...
You're the stupid man.
Yeah. So
man for the job.
Well, I also looked at it from Georgia's perspective. You know, most people in Hollywood don't know that, you know, the Pinewood or whatever it is now, that one of the biggest studios out there is owned by the Chick-fil-A people. I just find that funny that they don't understand who actually owns the very people they pick it against. But I looked at what's going on in the marketplace here, and I want to be an engine to help change the perception of some of the old school conservative politicians. So I had a multi-tiered plan to use that studio to start testing things, to make some progress, and then I wanted to build out more on it because it was on a couple hundred acres. Turns out that's not near enough, and the land wasn't going to be right for that. It was floodplain. You couldn't do a lot of stuff. And I looked at it and said, you know, this got to be done differently. And COVID came, and that gave an opportunity to just have that one stop. And meanwhile, I'm looking at Liberty. I'm looking at the messaging. I'm looking at stuff that's going on with some partnership and stuff with New Republic Pictures and L.A. Producing films, Rocket Man, the first film from New Republic Pictures, and Brian Oliver's a great producer, you know, and there's some goals shared, and it's kind of a place to get back to telling some interesting stories like 1917 and things that can come out. And I said, this is an opportunity, but we got to do this right, and it's got to be bigger. And then came the opportunity to look at how we're going to capitalize that. And at the same time, we're trying to fight with the politicians here. And I, being a, you know, people say you don't know what it's like to be a minority. I say, really? I'm a gay, ginger, Republican, Christian that likes guns. So maybe there's one other of us. I don't know. but I looked at it and I said, you know, we're looking at our messaging and the things for this country, and content and things are a part of it. And I said, we're going to do this. And I got up on a soapbox and I got kind of slapped around with it. But I'm saying, you know, this isn't fake. This isn't fake news even. This is very real. Now people are starting to see it. I mean, you have shifts going on in politics. Constituencies that were always Democrat are now shifting because there's things going on as the parties divide further. But my point was liberty. I don't care what label you're putting on it. I just want liberty in our country and what we're doing and good and da-da. I want those stories to have a place to come out. And how are we going to get back to that where we're not all slamming America and all the business people are bad and the socialist solution isn't always the winner. All those things just kind of grate at me. And I started looking at it and said, how are we going to do some of that? And I would talk and put things together, but I didn't get a lot of help. And suddenly some other things started happening. Some people that were more libertarian thinking started moving to town, and some of them, they started finding me, you know. And I remember saying, you know, we've got 4 gates that are being closed to so many voices, and those gates are big tech, big education, media and film, and science and health. If you're not totally woke or totally this or totally identity politics oriented. And if everything you are about you can't get through Stanford anymore. You can't get through this. You can't work in these tech companies. You're just beat up. It's not about being far right or far left. It's about being just people.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, we've got to get back to that. And some people that were interested in that started showing up here. And I guess I'm, crazy or lucky enough that I choose to move to a place many years before people that also believe that way start moving there. And they're big people, and it started becoming a thing where we put this concept together. And that's where we are right now is we're buying up a whole lot more land. We're in the middle of that right now. And on that is not only going to be a massive studio, but also corporate headquarters, innovation, a hub where people can come. The government's the state government, very helpful in creating the environment for our municipal utility districts where we're in essence able to make a new city, and it's 12 minutes from the airport.
Mm-hmm.
And to have those things start to happen with thinkers like Elon Musk and companies moving out that direction, and the Boring Company for hyperloops and all this stuff starting to come together. And it's an environment of objectivity where people can go, where a new university, first elite university in 100 years, it's just focused on being what universities are supposed to. All sides can come together.
Let's talk about that at the end, because I think what I really want to talk about before we get there is your background. So you, as you have alluded to a number of times, are a gay man. But you were a gay man growing up in Texas.
Yes.
Which I think, especially in the time frame that you were growing up, that's not exactly a safe proposition, or at least doesn't on the surface appear like that would be a particularly safe thing. There was an epidemic going on, but there's also a lot there. The attitudes towards homosexuality was definitely different back then than it is today. Definitely different. What was sort of your experience going through that? Like, how do you, and you ended up coming out the other side with, I would say, that almost the same politics as when you started, which is I think a lot of people would be confused by, because they look at LGBTQIA plus.
Just put a plus there
and that'll cover everything. I think they look at that group, that cohort, and say, well, that's almost always or exclusively going to be Democrat. And if you're not, as in the case of like Peter Thiel when he went and spoke at the RNC convention, people would say he's homosexual but not gay. They kind of like disavowed him as being even part of the culture. So I think you're, as you said, you have kind of you're in this very weird minority here. I'd be kind of curious to elaborate that a little bit.
Found was you said the general population. Say he should be. What I found was, it's like Fight Club. There's 25 to, under Trump, 32% of us that vote Republican. But we can't say anything when we're running around out there because you get canceled and shouted down and all that. So we just wink at each other when we know, And there's some really interesting, creative, powerful people, Mark Cherry, people that have been known now, but others that aren't out. And you would think in this great bastion of open-mindedness that is supposed to be Hollywood, and especially West Hollywood, I fell for it. I left Dallas at the time, found an excuse, an investment in load, but my real passion was getting out there to have my gay freshman year, to experience gay Mecca.
A Rumspringer.
To be like, okay, here I go. And what I found was the opposite, that the gay community was locked in a little bubble, and they weren't open. They weren't forced to intermingle. Mm-hmm. And they would sit in West Hollywood, right adjacent to Beverly Hills, and they would have the look, and they were getting bitter but they would have this look, and they would look when a straight couple or people walked into a restaurant on the other side of the line, the man would just get the look up and down, and then they would go, oh, the breeders. And there was no effort or interest in intermingling. And that irritated me, because more than half of my friends and the true friends that I found in Hollywood, from the John O'Hurleys and Bryan Cranstons and people that became, creative great friends from all sides politically, I liked having dinner parties. But the gay community would say, I'm not going if the breeders are going to be there. And so I look back at my background, and I started questioning what I thought.
Why do you think that is, by the way? Why do you think that that group of people don't want to hang around anyone who doesn't meet their particular ideology or background?
Because sadly, too many of them were just told, it's just ingrained in them that everyone hates them. They think, I guess everyone's guilty of this, but any group that would be considered a minority or an identity politics group tends to overly think about their, once I started admitting to being gay, everything became centered around the hub of look through the goggles of being gay. When in fact, most people, that's not the case. So I played on a gay softball team. It was a pickup Sunday. Some people were very good, others were not.
They're there for other reasons.
That was an interesting time. But noticing in that world, one of the guys they were a big charity. They ran charity and they made the films for the Human Rights Campaign. And I had become a board member and become involved heavily in the Human Rights, which is a gay lobby. And back at the time, we had President Bush. We had a short time. We had a control Republican Senate, House, and President. And so they were, of course, pushing gay marriage. And they were raising $29 million for their annual budget, and then another 28 or 9 to build a building in DuPont Circle. And for the gay, I'm saying, if you're doing your job, we don't need that. So in a few years. So when this started happening, I started questioning how they were going about it. Why were they raising all this money? What were they doing? And I would say it openly. And so one day I questioned him. I said, well, how much of your $29 million budget has gone towards getting, say, Republican candidates or office holders who are under 50 years old and lobbying them so that you can bring it across the line? We already own the left, don't we? And the answer was, well, 156. I said, they didn't have the answer. I had the answer. It was $156 out of 29 million. So I knew something's wrong here. They're not even trying. And so they, by and large, took us down a direction of forcing us to think that this is our only way, is to completely follow the Democratic side. And so I was giving a talk one time, and I was asked the same question. And I said, I didn't have a problem being gay until I moved to West Hollywood. Okay. And there's two things that are important to me there. And I asked one question to the audience at this thing. I said, why is it easier for me to be gay in my Republican world than Republican in my gay world? Why? They didn't have an answer for it.
Do you?
And I said, here's the problem, what I said a little bit ago, tying it back.
Yeah, but do you have an answer?
I do.
Yeah.
Because they think that everything's about them. So when someone from Bakersfield in California or from Texas in general looks at them, they think it's because they're gay. In fact, they don't know gay people. They hadn't, especially back then. It wasn't, the only thing they saw gay was on the gay pride parades on the news twice a year or once a year. And guess what? I don't want those guys teaching my kids either. But you know what? it's not the same thing. Gay pride parades are like Mardi Gras for gay people. The people taking their tops off and throwing beads in Mardi Gras, they go back to be school teachers. That's just what Mardi Gras become.
It didn't used to be that way, though. When the marches very first started,
I'm not talking about.
I know. But they had some real grievances. So
yeah, I know, of course they did.
Yeah.
And that's what they live. They live in that, but they haven't accepted their own acceptance. They still want to place blame. And so what they don't give people a chance. They target them and trust them. So for instance, some of our best friends when we moved to Texas are older farmers and people that come from all complete different backgrounds. And there's a couple of stories there. But this one talk I was giving where I asked that, and then I was asked, well, how was it coming out in Texas? And I said, well, actually, with your parents and with that, I said, actually, my dad outed me and my stepfather. And he called me one day and he said, John, there's a guy I do a lot of work with the World Bank. He's going to be in town. He's gay. I think you should take him out and show him around. I had just divorced.
He knew.
Well, I said, so you and Mom know I'm gay? Are you setting me up on a date? And he goes, John, the only thing in my life, there's really been only two things in my life that have confused me. And one was the day you got married. But he said something interesting. He says, your mother and I would just hope that you would stop messing around with all that and find somebody good and get on with it and have a life, because that's what we want for you. So the sooner you figure that out, the party can end and you can get on with life. So my partner and I have been 18 years. That's like dog years. It's like 70 years.
In gay years, that's a long time.
People say, why is that? Well, you got two males, and they're always like, what's next? What's next? And women are more, relationship. But that type of stuff that it just made me realize I can be myself. I can be into a relationship. I can be monogamous. I can be all of those things. Why do I have to call myself a Democrat if I'm for low taxes and get out of the way and I don't want this and I'm not a socialist and I'm for liberty and da-da-da-da. Why do I have to be that way? And people in the gay community that are vocal are always, and then the rest of us that maybe have. And so for gay marriage, which was a conflict, I went around it and I started helping support Dustin, or Lance Black, as I knew him, Dustin Lance Black, and some others that came up with marriage equality, which was, we got a conservative and liberal, the Bush v. Gore lawyers, and we got a thing in a case and brought sides and brought it and then took it and went through the court, 22 months, Supreme Court, boom, boom, boom. Mm-hmm. Now, on gay marriage from that standpoint, we also had to fight the other battles of getting people to realize that they weren't looking at you because you're gay. They're looking at you because you're different, and they're just trying to figure out if you're a good person or not. And once you are, in Texas, they'll defend you forever. Mm-hmm. And my husband told me that when he says, Jim Swartner, these people, you're right, they don't care at all. Here, it's so different. He thought when he was coming to Texas, he was going to be dragged around by chains behind a truck. And I said, well, not unless you pay extra for that. But that's, he's from Canada. He got it. It's all fine. So, but like you talk about, Governor Perry, you talk about people, and they say homophobic things sometimes because they get in the press for it, but they're just struggling to find their way. Doesn't mean they're bad. Doesn't mean they don't evolve and change, which they have.
A lot, actually.
Yeah. And these people, like one time we were invited to a party at the governor's mansion, and a dinner party, and Rick was there, and da-da-da-da-da. He was governor. Jason didn't want to go because he was scared. He didn't want to embarrass me.
Jason, your husband?
Yeah, he didn't want to embarrass me. Like, well, I don't want it to come up or have to explain. There's going to be 12 older people there, famous football coach, Gene Stalling, some other people. And he just, and I said, nonsense, we're going. This is who we are. So when we walked up on the porch, Governor brings us in. He's talking to Jason. We go into the parlor, and he says, Jason, you come sit next to me. and he starts talking about Jason and telling Jason's story of how disciplined and gymnast and Cirque du Soleil and da-da-da-da-da, and who he is and what kind of person he is. You know?
He's an amazing person.
He made him the rock star in the room. And then we went to dinner. He sat next to him. So Jason and I were going into the bathroom in the governor's mansion. They have these napkins in there with the logo. I always take some and put them in my, and the house manager's like, I'll sip you however many you want. I just feel better if I take them.
If I've stolen them.
And so we're in there, and Jason goes, well, I know what he's doing. I said, well, then tell him. And so he goes out and he's talking to Governor Perry, and they're about to sit back down at the dinner table, and he goes, hey, I know what you're doing. And Rick just goes, well, how am I doing? And he goes, well, very good. I thank you for that. And he goes, well, then sit down, let's enjoy. That personality, that type of a thing is something that the press will never tell you is going on, or people don't understand. These people, my biggest win is not as a big group. It's if we're playing golf or we're doing something that's, the hetero environment. And mine is the little wins that I like. I like it when people don't know I'm gay, and then all of a sudden they find out. And once they do, you notice them when they don't know you're around, like in the back the locker room, when all of a sudden they start defending you and telling someone not to do that, if they're gay bashing or telling those little wins with centers of influence that start saying, no, that's not who they are.
Yeah, the trajectory is definitely on both sides, I think, is going to a lot more understanding. I mean, we have gone from it being almost unheard of and very shameful to Grindr. I mean, and pride parades on TV and all kinds of things. I mean, it's swung so far in the direction of acceptance in every piece of media, effectively, and anywhere that you sort of look around, physically on the street, even, you'll see entire parts of towns dedicated to, a gay district, etc. That's just would not have been possible 30, 40 years ago.
No.
And so I think even the people on the very furthest, most conservative, Christian are still, going to stay there for a while, but eventually even they are going to realize that's a battle not worth fighting.
You're not ever going to win a battle totally on people's beliefs. There are some religions that believe a lot of things that people aren't going to believe. I won't even start there, but it's not the organized religion. It's not that. It's even in general, some of the people, once they start knowing and understanding who you are as a person, you're not a stereotype. You're now someone they know.
Yeah, I would say you definitely don't fit the stereotype.
Well, the stereotype is a minor part of the community. Most of us hide in plain sight. That's, the whole theme of X-Men. But I guess until we don't. But for us, it was a battle of, accepting ourselves and realizing it's okay. We are enough. We can be what we need to be. Now that we got gay marriage, we're into business. We're into this. We want this. Why do we have to always be put into this? Why is it that
some of the most powerful people in the world are gay?
Why is it that if I were just a white male, have the ability to be a liberal or a conservative, a Democrat or Republican, a libertarian, whatever I want? But if you say I'm a white gay male, now I have to be a liberal Democrat, or I'm called all kinds of names, or insert black male or whatever, change around. The same thing starts to hold true. And I just reject the fact that we don't have the freedom to be and pursue what we want. We're past the point where we're at Stonewall and we have to be this way. The politics have changed. The people have changed. Get on with it.
So let's talk a little bit about that. So there's these like code words like Friends of Dorothy or Mrs. King, which is the king, the missus would be the queen. There's secret handshakes, which I did not realize until much later on. And then someone told me, I'm like, oh, actually that's happened to me a couple times. The I'm gay sort of handshake. Bandanas, earring on one ear. I mean, there's all these little signals that people had to sort of subvert the thought police at the time, who were quite conservatives. And I think there's a strong echo of, in the same way I think people feel like there's an echo of, racism through slavery. This is the echo of this conservative right against gays. Misplaced or not, in both counts, that echo is what we're feeling when I think people are saying, well, if you're conservative, you're not gay. You're homosexual, but not gay.
Yeah, but that's just blatantly false, because the problem with that is it's the religious right that they point at, and they make that to see if you're the right, you're submitting to all of that of the religious right. But what they forget is the religious left is just as big or bigger. It's called the Catholic Church. Okay, so you can't just put it on the left or the right, because once you get into the middle of it, you see the religious left and almost the entire black community is all against it. Okay, so those are just marketed things that people stand behind to say, these are the reasons we can't be that. When more of the advances that are made actually get made with under either Republican leadership or with Republican support, because you can't do it just on one side alone. It's when you are able to sell your story and sell your idea and make that stuff work. There's a new angle with religion, strange bedfellows, that, the religions and the people that care are very concerned about population right now, because you think it's increasing, and here it's not. And when you get into abortion, you get into all these things, there's a weird circular thing that if you just stand back for it for a minute and you say, well, wait a minute, here's a whole group of people that now are normalizing and want children. And there's a whole group of people that want spirituality, but have rejected the church because they feel like the church has rejected them, organized religion. There's some interesting counterintuitive things that come together that make religions that are anti-abortion and want adoption. And then when you have the studies, my mother brought a study to my attention years ago. It said, the children of gay couples are turning out to be better educated and da-da-da-da-da. And I said, you know why that is, Mom? And she said, no. I said, well, because after they get through playing, the grandparents end up raising. She goes, oh, okay. Anyway, I'm just kidding. That's not true. But the reality is, I don't reject or want to put labels on it. And I'm interested in telling stories that show weird contradictions. And I'm very interested. Yeah. And there's so many scripts, but guess where they're sitting?
In some vault in Hollywood?
Because they can't get greenlit. They can't get bought. They can't get distribution because the people are holding them back there from it. I mean, why? Because there's big blocks of people that don't want those messages out.
So a mutual acquaintance of ours, growing up gay in Texas, his mother was not at all interested in him being gay, and did quite a bit of work to put him through conversion camp, conversion therapy, Pray the Gay Away. And I remember asking him about it, and I feel like it was mostly kind of a nothing burger in his mind, but he made the off-color comment. He's like, well, what do you think happens when you put a whole bunch of gay kids together? And so I don't have a whole lot of faith in that design in multiple ways, but
I was wishing I knew about it back then, because
you had a lot of more fun.
No, I just said, I think I need to be sent. My parents wouldn't have done it, but I could have said, no,
Can we go check it out
I'm
at least?
thinking these thoughts, and I need to be there in that environment because I mean, the pickings would be easy. We made some. John O'Hurley, an actor friend of mine, he always plays of being the Mr. Magoo, the fumbling, and we came up with a piece of content, a story to humorously try to tell stories like that about. So he and his wife in this scene we were to this put together, he's kind of the good-looking idiot who's surfed by in business and everything on his looks, but is not quite aware of Peterman. He's just basically his J. Peterman character, except they're at the thing and he gets mixed up. And instead of them bragging about the kid that they say they have, but they really don't, and so they have to explain why the kid's not there, he says at the dinner party that they sent their kid to Exodus, which he thought Exeter. Well, Exodus is a gay conversion. And the other people, now how old is your son? He's 8. Interesting. And this whole I Love Lucy goes, how you could start to poke fun at and talk about, because there are people that, but that's the vast minority of it today.
I think where I was going with this whole thing is there seems to have been some shift along the way where pride used to be sort of like, don't kill me, don't beat me up, I'm okay, I'm the Stonewall age. When there's a lot of very, very brave men and women who were involved in that, who really, and they were up against some really tough odds.
Of course.
And I think there's something really to that. And that type of pride, I have zero issues with. I think that's very admirable that they were able to accomplish it, as a matter of fact. But something changed where now we have like drag shows at, kids' birthday parties. And there's been a shift here where this is being pushed down to children.
There is a gay agenda, and it's a powerful one, and there are many dollars put politically towards people to push that stuff. I think I've been in the middle of it.
I think any sort of overt sexual activity in front of children doesn't matter which side of the fence you're on, is probably not wise for their psyche. Save it for them when they actually understand and have sexual feelings of their own.
I couldn't agree more, because it to me.
So
pushing that agenda off the backs of children is just not fair to anyone.
But it's not just that. It's the Mardi Gras of the version of gay pride that I think it's important that you don't lose visibility into any group of the population. Doesn't matter what they are. I don't care what orientation or age group or whatever we're talking about, sex or whatever. But I also think that there's something weirder going on here it seems like it's permeated in a way that is outsized from what it actually is.
I think it's been that way for a while, Robert. I mean, the problem to me with that thinking is it's an indoctrination school, and they're just trying to indoctrinate deeper and deeper and make it to where, again, if you don't adhere to these norms, if you don't, this is kind of a weird disconnect, but a lot of gay people become great at communication or great at things because when they're in my age bracket, and you went through the AIDS time, you had to hide in plain sight, and go back
scarves
to go back. Well, no, but to go back in your mindset about, you can go to a party or a bar or whatever in the straight community, you find a girl. Well, if you're in the gay community, unless you're in a gay, but in the rest of society, you couldn't go and intermingle. And so you had to find codes and cues. Now, all of those things with this earring or scarf, that stuff got hypothecated by style people that weren't, you couldn't count on that. But the one thing you could count on, I'll lose my gay card, but was the eye contact. And back before Grindr and internets, and Jason and I met on MySpace. That's how long we've been together. Mm-hmm. You could walk past someone, and I could do it in the straightest environment, and it's just the eye contact. I would walk past someone, and you make eye contact, and then you keep it for 3, a beat of 3 or 4. And that's the straight guy's going to look down and away. The gay guy will keep the contact.
Especially when you don't know them.
Right. That's what I'm saying. You're passing someone in a place I used to do it at the golf tournament at Lake Tahoe. I used to drive one of O'Hurley's friends that was always trying to hit on women, and there was this target-rich environment, hardly any gays, and I could find it like that. And he's like, how do you do that? I'm not going to tell you. But when you would see that happen, you had to find a way as a protective mechanism to do it. And that's why gays have always wanted to fight for the feeling of normalcy. They want the word marriage because we want normalcy. Everyone wants everyone, and the kids want to fit in. That's been something forever, and that's probably never going to change. And so that's why they are pushing, so many gays that get into power are pushing to move that down the line. I knew I was gay in 3rd grade, and I didn't ever admit it to myself.
That's an interesting way to phrase it, normalcy. So, I mean, if I look at someone wearing chaps and all leather and they're straight, I'm not going to say that's normal. I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you walking around like that? Oh, I'm just going to go get beat up. It's like, like, what do you do? What do you
here? It's because I work at a ranch.
Yeah.
I mean, they legitimate. Or a lot of them that actually
it's clearly not normal in the sense that you're not just going to see an average heterosexual person dressed or acting like that. So it's something else. It's more than that.
You do more now because you have people that are finding that they're getting attention. I find this more now recently than ever before. People look and act and pretend to be gay that absolutely aren't. And maybe they're just thinking that this is an easier way for them. Oddly enough, it's counter, but I look at it as just pendulum goes back too far. People, as they get, like the gay mafia got into power in Hollywood, well, as they start to control more politics, what they're just trying to do is, this normalcy, this fight for it, to make it realize that, had I known I was gay in 3rd grade, how would my life be different if I acted on it? That's a good question. I know how it would have been in college. I'd be dead. Mm-hmm. Okay, so
HIV was very serious and very prevalent.
I rejected being gay. There was best looking guy in high school knew I was gay. He was this, that, and he was always with me, and I couldn't shake him. And he went to school at a different school, and I was visiting one time, and then he had the best looking girlfriend and all that stuff, and he didn't tell anyone, but he knew he was gay back then. But he, brought me. I would have done whatever he said had I admitted it. He took me to a party. Boom, first time I'd kissed a guy, all that stuff. I'm like, I wanted it so bad in hindsight, but I didn't do it. I said, I'm not, you're wrong. By our 10-year high school reunion, he was dead with AIDS because I would have done what he wanted, and he was beautiful and doing everyone, and I would have probably, who knows? So you can't say that just forcing that on people when they're not capable of really knowing what it means to them yet or how to. I was late in processing it, and I'm glad I was. I wouldn't have Jason. My life would be different. It wouldn't be, what it is. But you can't legislate that down to that level because there is something else going on, in my opinion, and it is off the backs of gays, but it's not about gays. It's just about political power for people.
Interesting. So one of the things I've been hearing a lot more is liberals are no longer liberal. I don't know, how does that resonate with you? Does that
was what I started to talk about earlier about strange bedfellows in Hollywood, quote unquote, starting to change. Look at Joe Rogan moving here, comedy. Different types of content is now changing because it starts hitting. All the comedians used to be way liberal, way left. But then New York and LA during COVID, the mask mandates, they couldn't work. They couldn't work at all. And they started looking at things and saying, well, I don't believe in this. Why are these people able to control me? And then Joe Rogan makes the move and comes to Texas and comes to Austin. And then, he says, it just started making sense to me when I say, and then I hear Tony, a lot of these comedians that were formerly liberal, but one of the jokes that brings it home to me is one of them said, I knew there was a problem when I'm not allowed to work and earn a living because some government is saying stuff that is now proven to be not true. Mm-hmm. He goes, but you'd see it all over New York. You'd see people riding bikes with a mask and no helmet. He goes, am I that guy? Do I think that way? Am I drinking that much of their Kool-Aid that I think I have to ride my bike with a mask and no helmet when that bus is going to do more damage to me than these air particles? And he goes, a lot of them have started using a similar joke, but you started seeing people, and you see parents in California schools just, I have personal friends who's very big liberals, and the women in Malibu and all of that. And I showed up for Jason's birthday in Malibu with some dear friends. And the first thing she did when she came out and greeted me, she goes, I now agree with you. I've become this. And we had to take our kids completely out of school. We had to start our own school with a group of other parents because of all this ridiculous stuff. And she goes, they just do whatever they want and they guilt you into it. And this is, blah, blah, blah. When it starts hitting people at a granular level that affects their lives, people start looking at liberty as a solution again.
Well, let's hope we don't get too far down the line, because there's a pretty obvious end to that if you go the logical conclusion of what happens when states control what people do. So it's good that people are reacting negatively now as opposed to waiting.
I'm this right now, but if the parties were to change, with the woke environment, I think there's consequences to it that were unintended. They started the woke in order to control an environment, but what's happened is people are rebelling, and now they're being canceled that were normally considered themselves proud Democrats to the left, and now all of a sudden they thought they were safe, and now they're like, well, that wasn't what I signed up for. But you see people starting to say things like, well, wait a minute. Why don't I get a choice in this? Mm-hmm. And my saying that's overriding is liberty finds a way. It's not always pretty, but liberty finds a way. And that's what I'm hoping is happening right now.
So Gran Torino, the movie, yes. Clint Eastwood, he got a lot of flack for that, for being racist. But to me, it's just like...
Excellent point. Yes, go ahead.
This is, for those who haven't seen it, he plays this old crotchety racist guy, and this boy that's maybe threw a ball over his, I forget how they ended up becoming friends, but he just basically wants to shoo this kid away the entire movie.
He's being recruited by the Han gangs in this neighborhood that's converted from Ford production manufacturing people to, it's been taken over by Han as people move in, and the gang's recruiting this otherwise good kid to steal his Gran Torino.
There you go.
That's how his family forces him to go do good deeds for the old man.
The entire movie, I'm not going to spoil it for anyone who wants to watch it, but it actually is a very good kind of end to that movie. He basically is almost the exact opposite of racist when it's all said and done.
Yes.
I mean, it's an arc, it's a story, first of all. All things you watch on TV are they're stories unless they're documentaries, and even then sometimes. But there's this arc of this character who goes from extremely racist to the opposite, to being one of the most, heartfelt, conversions of a soul you could possibly ever witness in a single, hour and a half long movie or however long it was.
But did he really change?
Well, that's sort of the whole point of the movie, is sort of yes, sort of no. But the arc is very, you're watching this person who doesn't want to to change. He's stodgy. He's in his ways. And then all of a sudden there's reasons, and he starts putting up with it a little bit more, and it kind of wears on him, and he's like, oh, okay, fine. You know, he starts letting him be around a little bit more. And I think of all the movies I've seen that got so much flack, that one seems like a miss. Like, how did that one, of all of the movies, people decide that he's racist for having done this movie about racism?
Because it didn't fit their narrative, and that's the problem with what's going on. You take that type of a movie, which is a beautiful movie, beautifully shot movie, beautifully acted, beautifully directed, and
well written,
and completely on point, because it was tackling a very complicated subject of it's a change, it's times changing, and a man who didn't really change. He just had to change. He didn't really ever change.
Yeah.
He just had to adjust how he adopts. Now, the part where he changed that you're saying where he evolved was he got to know, this is what I'm talking about, the internet, and they just were different. He wasn't racist. They could have been black. They could have been this. They could have been, he was racist against his son because he was he didn't have a good relationship with his son because he saw him as a car salesman. Mm-hmm. But what have you, he just was that guy, but those people were different. But what he was interested in their character. And it wasn't that he didn't become racist anymore. It wasn't about race to him. It was just he got comfortable with who they were as people, mm-hmm. and then he would protect them with what? Like I said earlier, his life, mm-hmm. which he did, so to speak. Sorry for that. And the point was he even dumbed it down so much that he taught you how to be racist the way groups of people do to each other in the same group or in relative. He's teaching the kid when he walks into the barber shop, and he walks into his longtime friend, the Irish guy, and says, "Hey, you dumb Mick bastard, how you doing?" Mm-hmm. Blah. And then tells the kid comes in there, and then the guy for fun pulls, said, you don't have the right to say that. He's teaching them the difference between picking and being fun and using the races as both differentiating and uniting at once. That was a complicated thing for Clint Eastwood to do, but that's my granddad. That's his ring. That's what I grew up with. And I somehow understood that. So I never looked negatively at those people because they might appear to be a racist because they're calling something, because they were racist in a way. Everyone is in a way, but they were in like you said, in reality, their heart was really believing in people and good people. And they just wanted to know who you were, and then they'd defend you. Wouldn't matter who it was.
So for those not looking at the screen here, Mr. Robison has red hair, red beard. You are a ginger, as the
happy to have hair.
Colloquial, yeah. Some of us aren't so lucky. As I've heard you say a number of times, you're the last group that's allowed to be made fun of, and I think that's actually. I mean, I know you say it half jokingly, but it's the other half that's not joking. This feels like this is like the interesting reverse racism stuff that's going on, and a lot of people claim it doesn't exist or can't exist. Which actually I think is even a more interesting topic in some ways, but I think it is a bit weird that we allow certain things to be done, or we assume that certain groups are more in danger in certain situations than other groups of people are in other different situations. Like you don't know what it's like to walk down the street and blah, blah, blah. Actually, I have been in extremely dangerous situations that my life was very much at risk, and I was lucky, and I made a couple of, interesting maneuvers to avoid the danger. But there's definitely places in the United States and definitely outside the United States where, a white man walking down the street is not necessarily at all safe.
No,
and so I think there is something weird going on there where there's this. It seems like these arguments are coming from people who've never traveled at all. These people are living in, a very small microcosm who've just never encountered the fact that the world has very much, tribal lines. You travel to certain locations and people will know who you are, and you're not allowed there. If you start walking down the street in North Korea, you will be caught pretty quick.
Well, there's all kinds of things that come around. I used to argue during the political campaigns, this, that, and the other. So Hillary Clinton was taking a lot of money, as was the Democratic Party, because they were the newest group that was on the rise was Muslim, and they wanted to own that group and so they kind of turned their back on the Jewish people for that. If you started watching what they were doing, constituency-wise, they were raising more money from that. But they're running around in 13 Sharia law countries, taking money from them, from people that it's still legal, okay, and encouraged to kill gay people and women to be treated like some people, yeah. And yet, it's okay for that, but don't you dare be a Baptist. Baptists may not approve of gay, but they're not trying to kill us. I mean, it's not in the law. And so there's different levels or consequence levels for that, and those things should matter. I just say, as racism goes back to the Clint Eastwood movie, I think as the pendulum swings back, hopefully out of this identity politics, people can start being okay with laughing at each other again. You can't, take Clint Eastwood and that whole role, seeing it and being a part of it and how it's acted and how he meant it and all of those things. Most people look at that movie and they realize the arc and how this man and how his experience and his respect for it, they understand it. And they understood from that barber scene his racism. However, if you were to just read that on a text, it doesn't work. The guy is just this blatant. And there's
a nuance there.
Yeah, people have got to
and also
give it a rest and let people be and be for their differences. That you're not going to perfect that stuff.
And also, times change. If you look at comedy from even just 20 years ago,
right?
You go back and look at just the normal pop culture comedy stuff. Nothing even crazy.
Sure.
It's filled with racist epithets and, very overt sexual whatever. And I remember when I was a kid, I definitely used gay as an epithet, that is so gay. And so I know if you were to go back in time, probably not even that far, you'd find things I said that at the time were reasonable and, not even considered unusual amongst my friend group. And obviously I don't have a problem with you being gay or anybody else for that matter. So there's something about the lens that's been put on. It's a moral panic about the fact that they think
moral panic is an interesting way to put it.
I did not come up with that term, but I think there is a moral panic around we once did not have rights. It might go back to not having rights again. And
that's a political agenda.
Well, it is, except for I don't think Roe v. Wade is what people want to make it out in the press for many reasons. But it is an example of where people can point to it and say, hey, look, we had rights 10 minutes ago. Now we don't have them anymore. And
that would be wrong, because that doesn't mean that those rights don't exist. I mean, there needs to be education and pushing that stuff back to the states and all of that. And there's bigger agendas that push on all of those things, and that could lead over to gay marriage. We won it in the Supreme Court, and there are people saying, oh, well, they want to push that back. And that's just not, that's not the same thing as abortion.
Yeah, but there is something going on. Conservatives used to be just get out of the bedroom, just focus on business. Like, let me do my thing. It's actually more like les libertés. It's what liberals wanted, except for, with a tilt of having some religious overtones here and there. But there has been a shift fairly recently. Largely DeSantis, I think, is kind of leading the way on a lot of this. where, going after Disney and their corporate, they have all these tax loopholes. Why do you have these tax loopholes? Let's remove them. Now, I don't think DeSantis really cared one way or another about those loopholes. I think he cared about Disney being so woke and having their philosophy invade, popular culture. And this was punishment. So to some extent, you could say, well, that's just, again, government getting out of the way. Government shouldn't have subsidized any of that in the first place. That should have just been all capitalism. So in that sense, that's more like pure capitalism. But it's being used as a bit of a...
It's a wedge
lever.
issue.
Yeah.
It's always going to be used that way. Politicians will always do that. That's how they mobilize support for something they wanted to do anyway. Okay, now we've got a good reason to go after Disney. And what have you. And I hate it when that stuff happens, but that's just life, and that's the way
I think
politics
I think
works.
that is straight up politics, but it's one of those things that just gets so much airplay.
There's the point.
Mm-hmm.
It's the narratives are what the press wants the narrative to be. So you could say 15 things and then you say one thing like that. Well, in reality, that gay marriage should actually be a state issue. In reality, if you look at it, now if a politician said...
Or if it's not, go ahead and pass a law. If it's a federal issue, fine.
But if they said that and then said, but, what you just said, but, I don't think that's where we are, or whatever else they said to say that will never happen, I wouldn't even be for it myself, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, the only thing that's covered is that one soundbite, okay? And they're going to put it to because it's covering an agenda that's built on fear that says, let's say this can happen. They've tried to make abortion into the same issue and saying that this is what can happen, in the courts and in that stuff. And
so let me pause for just a second. So I think it's worth saying what actually happened, because I think a lot of people heard one thing, and I think it's worth explaining what actually happened. I'm not going to go into the history of Roe v. Wade, which I probably I should probably bring somebody in to specifically cover that, because I've got a lot of thoughts about that. The history of it, it's very interesting, actually. Norva McCorvey, just really, really interesting backstory about all that. But I think the problem is people thought that for whatever reason that was a good case law. And basically what the Supreme Court said, well, whoever passed this case law originally said it's probably somewhere in one of these amendments that this is covered, but they never specifically said why. And if you actually read the amendments, there really isn't a great place that there's not like a single line that really carves it out and say that's where someone gets their abortion rights from. And so what the courts just did is they said, well, it doesn't have there's no good place to anchor this piece of jurisprudence or whatever. You have to kick it back down. If you want to have a law, go have a law, and then it's law, and then you're good. If you want to have a state law, have a state law. But it doesn't. There's no Bill of Rights. There's no amendment that basically covers that.
I go back on it and I look at essentially I would have considered myself pro-choice for the most part. My granddad used to joke and say he was pro-choice. He'd say, I was pro-choice. Matter of fact, I believe that abortion should be legal clear up to the age of 18 years old. I would have had a lot less if he was talking about his son who was misbehaving. He said, I had a lot less trouble with my son if I said, I can still take you out. But in reality, the oldest adage of when is it a life and all of that stuff. And I'm
personally of the opinion people should be able to do whatever they want with their own body, period. I just do whatever.
Yeah. But I don't know. I just don't agree with, abortion on demand and being able to do it. I just don't think once it's, I was really moved by a couple of people. I didn't really care one way or the other until I started actually listening, and I started looking at the stats from Planned Parenthood on why it was originally created in the first place, and why is it that 70% of them are in minority and black area. I mean, there's a lot of, And what were they doing? And what were they doing in harvesting? Or when you start finding out all of the stuff that's going on.
I'm not at all saying there isn't some weird stuff going on in many regards. But what I am saying is,
I just don't think it should be encouraged.
Getting away from the morality,
it should be illegal.
Yeah, agreed. But regardless of the morality of it, I think the important point is the press took something that happened, which is actually kind of boring case law stuff. It's like, well, unfortunately, this thing
largely on privacy, but
yeah,
anyway,
I mean, this thing doesn't make sense because there's no place that this exists in these documents. So kicking it back down, if you want to create a law, but there isn't a current law to anchor this to. So I understand people's being upset about what it means to them or what they think it means to them. But this is one of those, the press really, really wanted everyone to get very angry about it instead of doing something simple like let's create a law.
Do you like the movie Wag the Dog?
Yeah.
Okay. So that leak, which is the first time a leak like that's happened in the Supreme Court, it's all politically driven. Okay. So the bigger reaches of the case, but it's just the timing of it was just trying to reset the narrative and trying to get some of those people that they were losing back. Mm-hmm. And the press is driving it and largely involved in it. And it's not, they don't even mind saying that's the strategy anymore. I mean, that to me is what's bad about it is, they're taking stuff like that, then they're using that to build more fear and more fear and more fear of rights. And, that's not where the Supreme Court was going on this. And as we get from a court that was going too much towards legislating law instead of lawmakers doing it, and judging law based on constitutionality, mm-hmm. which is their job. And
should be anyway.
And that's what this court is doing, and so when you look at cases like that, it's not saying this is right or this is wrong, but the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I don't think they should have any sense of morality in what they're doing other than this is morally the correct thing to do because this is what the law says. We used it when we did. The law says this, so we have to adhere to the law, whatever
we
the law
played
of
the
land
game
is.
with marriage equality. I mean, we played the game. We played it with Republican, Democrat. We went back. We did a case. We went through. But that wouldn't have passed without Republican Supreme Court members' approval. Mm-hmm. Okay? You wouldn't have had it. So we were playing the thing there, but what we had to sell the story. But we had to unite and not attack. You're not going to, you got to build a consensus and you got to be able to sell the point, and these things just happen that way. I'm just not a believer. I hate it when those things become just so black and white that you.
I think people just need to learn that how you solve issues like this is get policy passed, and yes. That's how it works. The court should not do anything other than make sure the policy that you got passed is being met, and that right. is. And they'll say,
but sometimes you have to have an activist court in order to get that policy passed. If you can't get it passed, and so, and guess what? If that were entirely true, we wouldn't have gay marriage right now because it wouldn't have passed.
It's a very slippery slope too. And now you have to pack courts and all right. kinds of terrible things.
And so that's just I think that in my objectives right now with bringing these 4 gates and these things that we're trying to do is we're trying to let all sides be able to tell their stories and have equal rights to be able to tell their stories and not be beaten down and be able to argue it like we did in marriage equality versus the Human Rights Campaign, which was just pushing it down Democrats and using it to attack all Republicans. And the Human Rights Campaign just became a political action committee for Democratic candidates, and that's wrong. Mm-hmm. That's doing it off. I don't want to be a puppet and have their doing that off the backs of all gays. We're not all the same. We don't think the same. We should have every freedom to be different. They shouldn't be passing that and using that as a wedge issue just to drive all their fundraising to. That's just not smart. It's not the way to get things passed.
So I've long sort of felt like you're a bit of a kingmaker. I mean, a lot of, governors and businessmen and billionaires and, all the people who kind of make things happen. Where do you think this is going? Who do you think is going to be, or what do you have a favorite for 2024? Do you see these types of wedge issues like becoming a problem for existing incumbents, or like what do you feel? What do you think is going to happen? If you were a betting man,
it's the economy, stupid.
Yeah, I think that is
the problem is, but it's more than that now. It's liberty, it's rights. People are now, all right, you fooled me. We're not doing this again. Okay, monkeypox. They're not even talking about the same stuff with that. Mm-hmm. We can't do that anymore. People are showing them this is the highest disapproval of a president in history ever.
I think latest poll I saw from, 573, whatever it is,
70,
570, whatever.
I don't know, 73%.
It was I think a 35% approval rating on Biden across the board, and even less for younger aged people who tend to.
More importantly, with independents and with people and with a lot of the women that were there was like a 73% disapproval rate.
Well, the younger generation is actually probably more of an interesting signal, because that means it's almost entirely going to be economy. That they generally will vote more strongly when there's massive movements in the economy, because they're more directly impacted by it.
Well, I think right now it's more of a combination than ever before of liberty and of people and of rights. They're now thinking that we have a chance to lose our country. Okay. We were going towards a direction before the election where socialism was so on the rise, and young people were like, oh, I think that's a good idea. They've just learned what it means. Okay. And they're like,
learn it in school, so how else would they get it?
But they just learned. They're watching it and they're going, shit. And we found like over 1 million TikTok kids, and their parents are liberal and they're whatever. And guess what? They're not. They're not white suburban youth. Those are the ones that are the most woke, because Lord only knows what's going on there. But the guilt, I have no idea. But it's a Hispanic female, and I just started collecting them and saying, look at this, and look how articulate, and look what they're fighting for. They're fighting for liberty. They're not calling it Republican or Democrat. They're fighting. They want the right to be able to do and to say, and they're fighting for it more articulately than most anybody that I see, except for say Chip Roy and a few, in Congress. They're fighting for it, and I just think right now I feel more positive about the direction, because I've watched this next generation, and I've watched so many Hispanics down in South Texas, and for these various different reasons, I've witnessed and I've made decisions and are completely changing, because they're saying this party, which was great during Kennedy and great during Johnson, did all this, they're not them anymore. What they're doing is disregarding us. They can't have a less effective spokesperson than Kamala Harris. I mean, just look at everything that they're doing. They're just chasing constituents away in a big way, because it's affecting their actual life. The gas prices, so they cut the pipeline. They did the stuff. They made this happen. So they made this happen. They made that happen.
So who do you think is going to be the 2024 front runner?
Well, I wasn't a Trump supporter at first. Obviously was a Perry supporter, but when he ran, I kind of looked at Trump and I said, we kind of need. I said, unfortunately, it's like a divorce lawyer. If you like your divorce lawyer, you've got the wrong one. Mm-hmm. I need him to go in there and wreak havoc and do danger. And sorry, Jason, we're not. It's just a discussion. If you want that, you need the guy, and the things he was doing needed to be done. He needed to be seen as crazy by the rest of our NATO. No one was paying it. All the stuff he did right, and everyone's incomes went up, and he did it in a weird way. I wasn't a supporter of his, but I grew to like what he did, and I spent time with him.
So are you thinking he's going to come back?
I'm scared he's going to come back. But
Is that your best?
I'm inside on some of that, and I would say that the only thing that's changing it is Biden and what's going on right now. No one thought it would be this bad. Mm-hmm. No one thought that they would have absolutely. I mean, Colonel Klink could have done a better job, and they know it. So now the more that happens, the more Trump is starting to go off what I believe and maybe know to have been the original strategy, which was to take the air out of the room for all the other candidates and take the money out of the room for all the other candidates that could appear for the primary and be Trump, Trump, Trump. And then Trump comes as the kingmaker and endorses DeSantis. Mm. And that's a good plan. But the more Biden is such a mess and the more this is such a mess, and they can't get rid of Biden because then they got Kamala. They're in a horrible situation. And the more that you go back and play tapes of what Trump said and warned, it's all happening, even more so than he said it would happen. The more that goes on, the more it emboldens him where his ego may take over and say, no, I can win this again, and I want to prove that I can win this again. So, and I'm kind of hoping that doesn't happen, that the original plan is.
So you first, or I don't know if this is the first, but you used to know Tiffany Trump fairly well because you were next door neighbors or something like that?
Well, Marla was a neighbor and friend and in L.A., and then she moved to Calabasas and this, that, and the other, but they were... and as Tiffany was growing up, I watched her grow up and always had that relationship. And she's a wonderful young lady, and she's engaged or now married, engaged. I had an experience with her.
I always thought it was interesting because...
Matter of fact, she got her brand new Audi when her father bought her this Audi A5 the night Jason was starting his big play he was doing in Hollywood. And so she was so scared she was coming over. And so I took Al Ruddy's parking space that was reserved for, 80-something-year-old Al Ruddy, producer of The Godfather, mentor of mine, to give to Tiffany Trump so that her new Audi could be parked in front and she couldn't get it dinged. Anyway, stupid.
So when the election night was happening and leading up to it, I was basically hanging out very heavily with a very left-leaning or largely left-leaning, I would say, group of friends.
Well, we're in Austin.
Yeah, it is Austin. And I remember the election night, sitting there on the couch, and there's a bunch of people in my living room there. And, they had the whole glass ceiling thing and this big auditorium, and it was going to be this massive, bursting through the glass ceiling, this big, symbolic thing. And everyone was so excited. There's popcorn and champagne flowing.
Hillary or the last one?
Yeah, this is Hillary. Yeah, Hillary. Oh. And then Trump won. And I got to tell you, I don't even think Trump knew he was going to win. He got this little tiny ballroom. There's like 50 people in there, and it's totally unglamorous. And I remember looking over to my right, and I saw no less than 3 people crying. And that was really striking because I'm not that invested in politics, and also I'm not that emotional about things like that. But to watch multiple people that I am very close to suddenly break down into tears was really strange. And then we found out that you guys were downtown, and my wife at the time and I went down and to hang out with you guys, and it was a party. It was the exact opposite. It was drinks and let's have a great time. And it was a great time. And
it's fantastic. I knew we were going to win. I just got a small ballroom because it was cheaper. And,
the delta between those two things was so strange. It was like, I can't even describe it. What a strange sensation it was to go from one extreme to another extreme in such a short period of time. And we're talking literally minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I
remember that.
I just got like, how did everyone get it so wrong? And then what ended up happening?
They drink their own Kool-Aid, and the press and the polls, and the thing with Trump was different because everyone was sort of.
But even Trump got it wrong. Hillary got it wrong. Trump got it wrong. The pollsters got it wrong.
Trump spoke, even though whatever billionaire status he is, he spoke to the blue collar and he spoke to the Rust Belt, mm-hmm. and it was things that people, no matter if they're not Nobel economists, understand, mm-hmm. which is politics shouldn't be that difficult. And he said, if we reduce the corporate income tax so that we're not paying
more than China,
mm-hmm. we bring businesses back to this country. If we can repatriate money that's stuck out of the country,
which directly benefits him,
then we can use that money with tax credits to rebuild manufacturing. And that's the way you're going to increase. And then the next thing is deregulation. We've got to compress the time it takes for businesses to function and get their stuff done. You've got to reduce old and ridiculous regulation. And that, more than even tax policy, fueled the whole thing. Obama and them were stuck in the thing that this is the new normal. We're never going to be growing again like that. We're too big. Every excuse they threw in it. If you just get out of people's way. Now, there obviously has to be laws and rules and this, that, and the other, but they go so far overboard. We all have experienced them, even in small businesses. People just needed a chance, and it took off, and jobs took off in those areas. And when you start constricting that again, and when we were a fuel energy for the first time, we weren't energy dependent. We could tell those other people to go away. All of a sudden, all that stuff came together, and to build that environment, you can focus on environmental through conservancy and to things that make sense. But when it becomes a religion and you're using it like they're doing now, they know full well what they're doing now. They just are willing to do it because they think we just have to throw away everyone's current lives now in order to get this through the next point. When all that stuff doesn't even work. We found out in Texas, we're the most diverse energy, our grid, of any. My real father was a utility president and was a public utility. I know, I grew up around that whole thing. I knew what was going on. When you get rid of our ability to produce energy and dependent on things that aren't proven and can shut down, you're going to create big problems,
mm-hmm.
And
I
so
had another guest on, and Keenan Goldman, talking about that quite a bit.
Yeah,
those are not particularly great energy sources, but
but guess what? They're also not allowing. So GigaFund, which is a great fund, Steve Oskoy and Luke, they're great guys, largest investors in SpaceX, and we're Steve and I walk and we talk about a lot of things. They're not traditional VC because they don't care about the little things. They don't even care about the things that most VC care about. They care about the crazy guy who thinks he can change the world, and they think he can too. And they care about the person from wherever they come from on the big problems, education, energy. And so we're looking at nuclear energy, and we're looking at, there's things going on at Texas A&M and things going on with energy pods, but we still have all these restrictions against, you can't even do an energy product on nuclear without it being EPA and federal government driven. And there's only one little loophole in that right here. But in having things where the energy consumes its own waste, where it's safe, where it's not, there's all this stuff that they're investing in and that people are doing that are just, changing the whole notion of nuclear energy. There's things that are changing, making wind more reliable. Innovation solves these problems, not restricting. Mm-hmm. It's always we innovate our way out.
So back to my question here. One of the things I thought that the press didn't quite understand about the politics of the time was there. I mean, you had things like the WikiLeaks thing that came out about what Hillary was looking at. Which, by the way, I never even saw anyone at all talk about the fact that one of the things in her emails was a top secret message. It was basically saying that Tony Blair has to get our authority or whatever before this goes live, kind of deal. More or less saying that we're in control of the government, our government and theirs. But also, aside from those little kind of sideshow things, I think people did not really get that there's a huge amount of people in the United States that are disenfranchised. And they are not the people who are living in skyscrapers. They're not even living in towns. They're on these weird rural areas all over the place. And they look at a guy like Trump, and he sounds a lot like somebody that they would have over at a barbecue.
And he's successful. And
he's very successful. And he's saying things that on the surface seem to make sense. Whether they actually do or not is almost totally irrelevant. And Hillary, on the other hand, they've seen her and they've seen her husband and they've sat through that episode, and it did not help them at all in their rural location in Appalachia or wherever.
The other is you're hitting on this because a lot of those people aren't polled. They don't relate to polls. They're not marked into polls. There were a couple that got it right. I don't remember what they are, but we talk about it. But when you look at it, there was also a lot of people. I was polled numerous times. I never once said I was for Trump.
Yep.
Not once. And when it got through all of that stuff. But it was a phenomena in that regard that there were so many people there because they finally said, well, this guy's pulled himself out of a lot of problems and he has confidence and he has a plan. And what has she really done except be entitled? And we really don't like her. Even her husband doesn't like her. Those things that people think. And so there were a lot of people that would say they're for Hillary, but when it really came down to it, they just didn't vote or they voted differently.
Preference falsification. So why did Biden win?
There was so much going on in these 6 key states, and there were little things that were extending the time to vote and creating an environment so that so much could be done that you just can't track. And they're very smart about it. But I think it's a bigger reason. I think, I hate to think we had anything to do with it, but we were preaching right at the last part of the election that Trump needed to start in his rallies. He needed to go and say, this is what I'm doing next. Because he did every single thing he promised. Everything. Successfully. So now what were people thinking? And so we did a thing called, Break It Up, which was, and we talked with Rick Grinnell and that, and we came up with some statistics and some tracking with big data. Real big data. People who have Cheetos on their shirts and all of that stuff. Not
I know a lot of those.
Not the analysts that the politicians use.
Right.
I had to have an argument in the White House with some of those people after the election about it. But the whole problem was
not enough Cheetos.
All right. The whole problem was Trump went after, big government, the proverbial swamp. And he was actually making a a big difference. Just like he was with China, he had beat off a lot of people. They were scared of him because the swamp is not made up of just this little conspiracy. It's just this groupthink that forms, and I call them mean girls. It's like this husband and wife, and they both work in government. Maybe they're career tracked and they've gone up their levels at whatever agency, or they've flipped from agency to agency, or they play ball and their kids are playing ball with people and they party with that are in the press, and they're all in this little, and they look at and they use the word passenger for the elected people. Oh, those are just the passengers. We're the ones who run everything. And so Trump was making a big difference in beating up on them to the point where he was damaging them. The swamp looks at politicians. We need the competition between Democrats and Republicans as if you're in a fighting rink. But don't you dare take it outside the rink. You know, we need you so we can both sides raise money to fund our machine on K Street. But we don't want you to go outside of that. We need there to be the conflict. But in reality, we don't want that much to change because we really run everything. Okay? And with that groupthink that's happened, the idea to break it up, meaning let's take all these Department of Energy, and move them to all these different states, maybe the 38 states that we like, but what have you. You'd start breaking up Washington and making the Department of Energy, could be in Texas, the Department of this, and start moving those around and making those federal agencies be in, and where they're not all in one place and all in their control group and with their other people going in and out. You've just got to find a way to break that up. And they started preaching that, and that's, you know, there were people inside. Half the people in the Trump White House were not his friend. I mean, I saw it immediately when I was in there. It's like I had to argue with some of them. It was amazing. You know?
So you more or less gave him a recipe for how he could theoretically utilize the local electorate laws to say that you guys get to decide who gets to be president. You don't have to rely on the vote. You can do whatever you want. Why didn't he go for it? Why didn't he do it?
Well, when we were, you know, looking at it at that time, there were people that we discovered later because, I mean, an associate of ours, Morgan, had come up. He was just selling me on the idea, and I went, got Rick Perry, and we got Rick Grinnell on the phone. Marla Maples actually helped. It was amazing. And we went because he had given a talk on kind of the problem with the swamp. He was full on board with that. He's another gay conservative. And so we had that conversation with him on a Saturday, late afternoon. By Sunday morning, Don Jr. was on Maria Bartoloma talking about it. Break it up. Boom. They were starting to be in rallies. It was all over. He had Twitter things, break it up 3 or whatever. And it just started to get momentum. But forces inside, mainly Mike Pence's chief of staff, who really had control over a lot of the inner workings around the White House, more than Mark Meadows, because secretly they would meet behind. He was the swamp's control person in there. Rick Perry told me stories when he was Secretary of Energy about how they had assigned him certain people and this, that, and the other, and he caught him just totally circumventing what he wanted to do. He said it's a hard thing. Trump had more energy than he ever dreamed of. He was able to just keep his world tight and focus on it, but he got into a situation where the advice he was giving him started coming, as it did later, from the wrong lawyers, and they were influenced to the point, in my opinion, that he drank their own Kool-Aid, and they just saw the numbers. They saw the numbers, and they weren't seeing what was being done on the other side in these states to create the environment for them to have votes that just show up, like in Georgia, where they could go and get their early voting. Okay. People were pointing it out, but I don't think Trump listened. They could go not only get their mail-in vote, then they could get early voting. So in essence, the way it was done, and in Georgia, the labels weren't on the actual ballot, just on the second envelope. Mm-hmm. So you could get your mail-in.
Well, let's talk about election tampering in a second. I'm just curious, do you have any sense for if he had followed your advice, do you think he would still be president?
I think so. Well, had it been done early enough and kept on that, but they would have. I don't know. I can't say that actually, because that machine was so hell bent on him, and some of the state legislators had passed these rules that made the voting. I mean, we found neighborhoods where 99% of the people voted. That doesn't happen in the villages in Florida where they have nothing else to do. Mm-hmm. Okay, you don't have that when they've never had that level of vote, and 20 and 30 people out of the same place. There are just so many. So
let's
problems
that
have not been addressed.
Let's leave that off the table for a minute. Let's just talk about election fraud as a thing, as opposed to this specific election, because I think there is some weird perception in the United States that we have this incredible sanctity of voting, and I have all kinds of reasons to believe that is not true, and I'll just kind of start enumerating some of them.
I just saw it.
So a very good friend of mine was engaged in one of the penetration tests on one of these voting machines, and I'm like, oh, how did that go? It sounds kind of interesting. He's like, Robert, it's one of the stupidest things I've ever done in my entire life. It's a complete waste of my time. I'm like, okay, how did that go? He's like, well, they brought me and 5 other people into a room, and they said, you have 1 hour to find whatever you want is going to be wrong with this thing, which is a very strange thing. Normally in penetration tests, they give you days, weeks, whatever, enough time to do the test. And he's like, well, no, there was 5 different people who all were hired different companies. So we're all in conflict with one another. One machine. And they didn't bring anybody technical. And there was one sales guy who wanted to do a pitch to explain how it works and the underpinnings of it or whatever, which is all just eating into that 1 hour. And so they really independently got no more than a few minutes each on this device. And obviously weren't able to do anything in that few minutes because you can't even get started with something like that. Mm-hmm. So effectively, the penetration test that was sanctioned and allowed to be done on this machine effectively did not happen at all. I mean, really, it just did not occur. That's one example. Another example is I saw a situation. It was actually in California. A journalist got in touch with me. He's like, hey, Robert, will you take a look at this? There's this website. I think it might be compromised. I'm not 100% sure, and I want to know if it's possible. And it was a California website that had, it was basically the voter registration system or something. And the very first page, the only form on that page had an exploit called a SQL injection that would allow me, a bad guy or whatever, to log in and basically do anything I want. And the way that particular system was set up, it was designed to have no logging whatsoever so that it preserved the privacy of whomever entered the data. So there's no way to actually validate if any of it's been changed at any point. And yet a guy like me could literally on the very first page, very first form, get into it. And then I took it, I think it was the Ukrainians. They open sourced their system so that anyone could take a look at it. And I found dozens of issues with that one. And another example is out of Florida. There was another journalist got in touch with me. He's like, hey, Robert, there's these people coming in and they want me to take a look at this thing. They claim they've compromised all these databases. They have all this information. They sent it to me and it was absolutely 100% doctored, totally fake. But they were trying to convince the FBI, the Secret Service, a bunch of press people, and a whole bunch of other politicians that, in fact, things were being tampered and broken into when it was absolutely all fake. And then, of course, we have WikiLeaks and so on. So there's lots of examples out there of election tampering that I personally have seen.
And you have that knowledge, and we have, and I know a lot of people that do. That's not my, the technology of it is, I'm aware and I'm an editor of, but I'm not the guy who can break down the code. But we had people like that, and some of the stuff we evaluated, for instance, in Georgia, was amazing what was actually going on. And in Wisconsin and the 6 states, when you could look at these numbers, the big data doesn't lie. It was pointing out this stuff. Then you go back and you could track where the votes and how they were doing it. And they were building databases of votes, and in DeKalb County, where then they could see what they needed, and then all of a sudden the votes could just be run all of a sudden at the last minute from votes where there was nothing you couldn't prove. They were taken out of the envelope, so you didn't know who the voters were. They just had currency. It was like currency. They could just run through there. There's no way to track that. There's just, in the voting system they set up, there's no way to track whether that's fraudulent. I myself look at, there's no logical reason why you don't have voter ID unless you are intentionally trying to, it's entirely too difficult to not be, to say, oh, you're disenfranchising someone, because we don't even have to fight that argument. That's so stupid. In California, I committed voter fraud, but then admitted it just to prove a point in my neighborhood, because my guy across the street didn't vote, wasn't going to vote. I went down and voted as myself. Then I went down and voted as him. And then before I gave it in, I got the precinct person. This was in a garage in a neighborhood where the voting was going on. And I just said, I just did this. And I'm literally just about to stick this in here. And I had my phone, I was filming it. And the guy goes, well, then I should have you arrested. I said, I haven't done it. I'm just telling you, this just happened.
This is how easy it is to do it.
And what do you have to say about that?
So there's a difference between being able to do something or having been done in the past or done on a small scale or whatever, and actually changing an election. I mean, there's a pretty big delta between those two. So do you have any?
You don't have to do it. You do it, and you did it, and you got it in 6 states. You got it through legislators to make that stuff happen, and those states that mattered, that were that were swing. I don't know whether it means that the election was thrown or not by all of that. I just know that I was disgusted by how much fraud there actually was, and I was disgusted by the fact that, where there's smoke, there's fire with these voting machines. I don't remember the name of it now, but the one, the guilty one. And the only county, I believe, in Texas where there was a problem with the vote was the only county that used those machines, in Collin County, I believe, up in Dallas and Fort Worth area. And you look at it, and there was just massive problems with it. In Georgia, we had people that were brought together as part of this, that on televised live during the runoffs for the Senate after the presidency. This was just to prove the point. They had all those elections going on there. A hacker on the system in front of the state legislature asking them, where do you want, during the actual election, televised, where do you want me to hack? Plug into this. Boom. Plugs in, changes the formulas for the numbers of votes. The way it's still the exact number of votes, just changes. It's 1.56 to this, to the ratio, so that it adds up to the same number of votes. But your vote for Trump is only 0.8, and you changed it with stupid formulas in the math. No one would cover that. It was covered on Fox, but no one else was covering it. I'm like, McFly. I lost faith in the election.
That certainly points to deficiencies in our voting system, regardless of whether anything did or didn't happen, or did or didn't happen at scale. I mean, obviously, voter fraud happens all the time.
To me, it's easy to fix. Why aren't we fixing it?
I think I literally heard a story about a girl in Austin who was voting in multiple states.
Oh, we found that all over the place.
Yeah. So I mean, this
in
happens.
Georgia, we were testing it. That's where we were working on all
this
that
happens
stuff.
so frequently. Obviously, we need a better system.
Do you know, if you just took the people that weren't legally voting where they should have voted in Georgia, that actually voted and didn't have the legal right to vote, that would have changed the Georgia election enough right there. And we finally got the Secretary of State, and the government had to admit that those numbers were wrong. Of course, it's too late. But there you go. That's just got to be fixed. You know, I mean, you can't go and complain about this election now, but it did identify, and it did at least, I thought that we lived with this super sophisticated system that couldn't be broken, and I learned differently.
All right. So now I'd like to talk about education a little bit, because Texas is kind of a weird place in general for all kinds of reasons. And one of the ones is we have a new university that's coming online, which I hear you know a bit about. It is University of Austin, UATX, which is uaustin.org. They have such people as Barry Weiss, Joe Lonsdale, Richard Dawkins, Ayan Harcia Lee, and its whole premise is it's a pursuit of truth. And how did we get here that Texas has this thing popping up here? And how did we get here that we have to have an institution filled with all these amazing people and all in one place, because they can't interrogate the truth. They can't do whatever they need to do in any of the different institutions in the United States. How did we get here?
Well, the institutional groupthink that's gone on and how that's been taken over. A lot of these people are angry because they went to Stanford or they went to Harvard or a lot of these places, and they can no longer have their kids go there. There was another guy in UATX, and I can't remember his name, that was famous for taking essentially Mein Kampf and then changing it a little bit and putting a thing and submitting it as a paper as him being a left-leaning and all of this stuff, and he was revered for it. He's like, it's Mein Kampf, you know? And then he got away with it 3 times before finally, and of course he's been beaten like a drum because of the ridiculousness of it. And so when UATX was, you know, the mindset of it was just to say, we need an elite university that is not going that direction. It's saying no to that. And we need to have it as a place where people from all persuasions can come and have those ideas and argue it out and do what education was meant to do. And over 6,000 applications came in the second it was announced.
Yeah,
from all over the world.
I believe that.
And donations and all of this stuff going on with that. And it doesn't even know exactly what it's going to be yet, but it knows that this foundation of liberty and this foundation of having the freedom to be able to speak and to without just being canceled into oblivion was such a powerful call to people like Joe Lonsdale and people when it was for me to say that I can't have my kids going to the school that I love so much because it's no longer you can't have any ideas. You can't trust the ideas that come from it. And sooner or later, it's easier for them to just play the game, but then they don't end up with the right education. And these people are very, very serious about wanting to fix it. And Texas, it's just kind of the right place for that.
I think one thing that's kind of interesting is COVID really did a number on a lot of smaller schools. Like it's going to bankrupt an enormous amount of schools. And I was looking at the list of endowments for that same time period, and they went up tremendously. And that makes sense because a lot of people didn't show up. And so you got to have some way to keep these massive institutions afloat. The second largest was, I think, UT Austin. And that's kind of interesting because it almost weirdly flies in the face of something you once told me that UT is basically one of the very few colleges, if not maybe the only one, that is absolutely totally independent and will never go bankrupt because it makes money and not loses money.
Well, the University of Texas system and the Texas A&M system have permanent university fund, and UTEMCO manages that. It's University of Texas and A&M's. It's a fund, and it's based on oil and revenues and energy and land, and it's just massive, and it perpetuates, and they have to spend a certain amount of it a year, but they still argue over their budget cuts and their this and their that. And University of Texas, the way it's set up, it is massive. Its endowment is entirely separate, though, and that's massive. A&M is structured a little bit differently, and it's like actually now in a better position because A&M's considered state assisted, not state supported, because of the amount of their budget that comes outside of the state. But also they have,
which they could probably turn off because they have enough capital coming in if they had to.
They can do what they want in a lot of ways. A&M has its own aircraft instead of TxDOT aircraft. A&M has Gulfstream, whatever. It's like, but they also they have Texas Education, they have real estate extension, agriculture extension, energy extension. They're all extensions services that are independent of the university, whereas the University of Texas' system, they all report to the state. A&M's don't, they report to the chancellor. And they have all of that where they can do it, and they run their own system. And in the past, that hasn't been important, but now all of a sudden it is. Because as universities move to where the undergraduate stuff can be done more online, when you get to more of the bigger universities are going to be more research oriented, and all of the stuff that's coming towards that, A&M has better than anyone on the planet these extension services, and they're a tier 1 research school. But the way they're structured allows them public-private partnerships out the kazoo, and other small universities just don't have that.
One of the things I read online, I can't remember where I read this, but I thought it was pretty interesting. They said, this person was like, I'm okay with people being able to decide that their education wasn't valuable enough or whatever. They need to default on their loans or whatever. But I think that should be paid off by whichever college they went to.
Interesting solution. Interesting question. I have a comment on that.
And I thought that was very interesting because I think one of the problems a lot of the CEOs I talk to, they say pretty regularly is, well, why are we paying so much to this institution, which has clearly produced this mass of people who are unemployable? Why don't we only incentivize colleges who are actually doing the job? And why aren't they required by law to say what the population density is that are actually employed and what they're being employed by or whatever, so that at minimum, if they're going to get state funds or government funds or whatever, you at least as a taxpayer know where this money is going, the extra money that comes from the states. So I don't know if I love that idea, but I did think it was interesting. What do you think?
Well, first of all, make a note, and your producers make a note. Let me make a referral invitation for a guest for you to have here, RSnake. Okay. Steve Oskoy. I don't know if you've met Steve with me or not, but he is GigaFund. Mm-hmm. And lives here in Austin has for a while, and they're, like I said, the largest investors in SpaceX. He was Founders Fund. He was all of that stuff. He's young, but their education solution, I think he'd be an interesting guest anyway. But one of the things they've done with education is on the tuition that's paid, and this and the other, if you're not getting the job and you're not satisfying what the employers are hiring, if you're not employer ready, and if you're not getting that job, they refund your tuition. Okay. There's an education program all built around some of the schools that they're funding and building, which is changing the way education
as a
is done.
new entrance into a college. I would love that because
who else loves it?
At least makes it absolutely sure that we're all of our incentives are aligned.
And the employers. So that's what he's trying to do is let's not look at education by baby steps as to what we can and can't do. Let's look at what it should be and why. And let's build things like that. Whether it's education, home building, all the things going on. That's what GigaFund is doing. and go research some of the. I'd love to.
Sure.
I'll make that introduction, have you on,
Sure.
because
Sure.
those ideas on education and who they're supporting and why that works with what his involvement also with UATX and with my projects. It's just solving bigger problems with bigger solutions and removing the barriers to ask what if, and then supporting those ideas that can over time make sense, and without the short-term thinking that most VCs have to do.
All right. So where do you think we are going, and how do you think we got here? So the point of my question here is more like the GOP and the Democrats have done this weird dance where they've moved across lines. The Democrats were the party of slavery, chattel slavery, and the GOP was about removing that chattel slavery. That's the origins of the GOP. Then now we have an issue on the GOP side where there's a significant concern that it's getting an enormous amount of support from that same group of people, like the KKK, for instance, which barely exists at all anymore. But other organizations call it Proud Boys or whatever, that might be, sort of the next generation of those things. We also had this, this kind of a strange change in politics where, I think for the most part, religion really wasn't part of politics for quite a while in the early 1800s and maybe even the early 1900s, and then it became a huge point in the mid 1900s and beyond. It was basically if you're not very religious and pray to God every single day, you're not even there's no chance you're going to get elected, and that is still to this day something that every politician has to prove if they're going to even step on stage.
I don't know. I don't know if that's the case anymore or not.
Well, I mean, even Trump, he carried a Bible across the street for a photo op. I mean,
that's for fundraising and money.
Yeah,
and
that's exactly my point.
Because those are the base that vote, and you just don't want to chase them off.
That is entirely my point.
Yeah.
That is not
But the Catholics have to do the same thing, and that's why they, on the left, they have to, and that's why they're going after, especially on a religious basis, more different.
So do you see
it's
that
all fundraising?
Do you see that declining, or do you think that's increasing? Do you see the parties distancing themselves internally from these groups to avoid the stigma?
No. I think during primary times and during elections in general, there's always a fundraising class and always a fundraising element, and you have to address it. It's part of it, and therefore, if there's a pile of money somewhere, they're going to go after it.
So you think we're going to continue to see greater divergence of the left and the right? They're going to.
I don't think you have to do that. I think there's new parts of the right that are coming up. To Peter Thiel's, the New Republican, the people that are not. They're more like way we think. They're libertarian in nature, or they're this, but they're less religiously imposed, and they're less, they're less Puritan, And there's many, many more of them.
So is that
coming out?
Is that a push to the center? Is that what you're thinking?
Not necessarily the center. They're still rapidly this way or that way. Sometimes more extreme when it comes to drugs or what have you. But they're just taking some of the old guard out of it while not chasing them out of the party. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so they're just allowing the others in instead of allowing that element to push them out. They're saying, no, that's over there. And yes, that's necessary, and this, that, and the other. And you may not like the church. You may not even believe in God, but we're a Judeo-Christian country, which means we're built on those principles of freedom and this, that, and the other. And that's what built our system of liberty. So people are saying, but that doesn't mean I have to be a slave to modern religion. My particular church, or raising money off this sin or that, the fear mongering and things that churches get pointed to. I don't go to church. I'm a big believer. I have faith. I have it for my reasons, but I don't want them raising money off anti-gay stuff, and that's not happening as much anymore, but it does. And so I think that people rejected religion, and religion's having to get smarter in order to bring people back in. And people that are spiritual in nature are saying they recognize that there's a spiritual need. And even if they're not totally religious spiritual, in many cases, they'd rather have their kids educated at a Jesuit school than they would at something that's preaching, the stuff that the public schools are teaching now. It's kind of a complicated question, when it comes to religion and polarizing.
I'm just curious if we're going to see greater division, or we think this country can heal itself. Is it?
I think it heals itself. I think it's healing itself. I'd say that now, and I would answer it completely different 2 years ago. I'm shocked at how it's healing itself.
So we're not facing down the barrel of a civil war or anything crazy like that. We're
not unless that's if they get their self against the ropes there and start taking away our rights and our gun rights and our what have you, to the point that people start reacting to it. I don't believe we're there. I think that
well, that's good.
I believe and see a lot more hope just on the banter and the traffic and of the young and the TikToks and the people that are fighting for liberty.
See, I see not an insignificant amount of people inside Texas talking about the Republic of Texas as a very real option. Let's just break off. Let's get out of this because the United States is mismanaging itself. Let's just be our own country again. And
Texas is very well able to do so, especially when it gets these problems with the energy grid, because it has its own energy grid for a reason. It just needs to get it unwoke and back on track to where, the end of what it's producing. And there was some derelict nature, but essentially it has the economy, it has the aspect to do it. And that's always this option people like to talk about. It's harder to accomplish. But in our lifetime, if things were to go too far to the left and the track that we were on, I would see that as a real possibility.
Wow. See?
For the first time,
Yeah, I mean,
at a certain point.
That's what's surprising to me. This isn't a fringe thing. This is a lot of people saying
it's under the cover, but Rick Perry got chastised for saying it back when and called a racist and all that. But his point was, look, if it ever gets to that point, we're set up to take our football and run, and we could survive as a country. Okay. And people, if enough people are having enough of their stuff taken, then this stuff on the border, which is all that matters in Texas right now, is the border. Because right now, what I can't understand, but why more people understand than the press is talking about, is fentanyl. Okay? That's killing more people than anything. And it's just being brought right over the border. And the people down in South Texas, Washington, D.C. mayor's complaining about 3,500 people that, I'm happy to say, Larry, a friend of mine, Larry Abramson, came up with the idea a long time ago and about paying for the buses. And I sent it to Governor Abbott and his chief of staff. And they're saying, I don't know if we're going to do that. And then later they said, we're going to do that. And sending just busloads of them.
That was your friend's idea, huh?
Larry's idea. Larry is, I call him LNN, Larry News Network, because he's always ahead and he's typically right, because he's focused on it and he thinks through it and he's analytical. He's a movie producer. He could break down movie scripts like nothing, but he thinks through, not at. And he just doesn't understand why people aren't seeing some of this stuff. But he's been a right on all these issues, safety moms, all of that stuff. And so when you look at it, he's also an everyman where he's speaking to people that are saying,
he being Perry or Larry?
Larry, in this case, saying these are the things that are hitting, and he's quicker at it than most of the political campaigns and their consultants. And I hate the Republican Party's consultants because it's all about how they make money off of it, and they too often miss the point. The people are finding it anyway. And people are finding their way there because they just want their liberty, and they don't like seeing this was working and now you've totally blown it up. And we know you've blown it up, Biden. We're not stupid. You can't sell us on the fact that you didn't blow this up. So why are you doing it? And we want this changed. And I think these shifts that are taking place now are going to be longer lasting, and that the parties are reshaping again, especially as Peter Thiel and people like that start spending more money and more effort, putting more people like Blake in Arizona and some of the characters that are being put back in a lot of money and support in their campaigns in Georgia and in other places. When you start, we were fighting. I said, why isn't anyone seeing this? And this is a few years back. I said, I feel like I'm on an island doing this for myself. And the Elon Musk comment was, I said, where's our George Soros? Where is this? Why aren't we organized? I feel like, well, Republicans are always out working and they're doing their stuff. They're not organizing and doing that stuff. I said, well, why don't we have people organizing, and where is our George Soros who's thinking through this at those levels and putting money towards even the DA elections and all that stuff? Why aren't we doing that? And Elon Musk's comment is, George Soros is a rounding error. We're here now. We're doing it. We're attacking. There is stuff going on. There's a lot of stuff going on, and a lot of it's meeting and a lot more help. And one of the angles is we've got to help open these gates in education where the people don't feel like they have to hide, where the voices can come out. There's power in force, where people want that freedom and aren't scared to speak of it. And I see that happening more in the last few months than I'm literally motivated by it. Not just these hidden million TikTok kids, but it's starting to happen with the youth and the independents. And I see more organized, and I can't say some of the stuff that's going on, but there's stuff going on even here in Austin, from city council and all kinds of different things to just at least make it libertarian. But then starting on some of these other key cities in the country, there is a force, there is stuff going on and ways to get our media back. So media and movies, making it all right to be a capitalist, making it all right to win, making it all right, and that good things are done, that the rich people are always bad. These stories are waiting to come out, and there are a lot of them out there. They just haven't been able to be greenlit, and now they're more and more able to be greenlit. There's some things that have had to have been done, but we're inside the gate, and they don't know where we are, and we can greenlight things, and that's going on more. So there are going to be a lot more stories, and I'd like a lot of those to be made here in Texas. And the TV shows are eight episode TV shows, which are a movie and a sequel, because people are watching it more at home. And the quality of that content coming out is, I think, and that's, I think, going to be a great home for more stuff to be done here in Texas, which leads to how do we prove to the other parts of the Republican Party that content is not just liberals and entertainment. Content is the second largest or third, sometimes largest export of this country, and Texas should own that. And so it's not just entertainment, but it's education. It's all these things. Content is massively important. And we are educating those people at A&M and at University of Texas that are all populating, the animation companies, the ILM, all that stuff, going back since 1979 in the architecture school at Pixar, all of those. They're just being filled with people from our universities here, and instead of sending them there, that should be done. We should be moving those companies here.
Yeah, great.
And there's a lot of ways to do it, and there's some people working on how we get that done, because like other things that are opposite of what you thought, Hispanics in South Texas voting Republican because they're sick, it's that same thing can be happening as people reject what's going on in Hollywood. And you'll see more stars starting to come out and say enough. They're not playing that game anymore. And we had Friends of Abe, out there in Hollywood. But But more of that stuff as it starts to come to this environment, I think people are going to want to expand the number of stories they can tell. And when those can get greenlit, you create an ecosystem. And we have one thing here in Texas that's really massive, and that is, all these other little podunk states, Oklahoma, they are offering incentives to bring people in until they last for a little bit, then they get voted out. But what we have, if we make it where it's not just based on legislated budgets, but it's based on a form of what franchise tax credits, and you only vote on it once in the legislature, then it can be. Then we have what we have that other states don't, is we have more big companies and more companies moving here, that would love to be able to participate and get divert some of their franchise to go towards things. We can create a whole new incentive program here that's not based on a legislative budget, and it can be better than any other incentive program. And at that point, we can own the industry. Mm-hmm. And I just, have to work through that process with the politics here to help that happen.
So, what are you doing these days? Tell me about Arena Edge.
Well, it goes back to some of the
your copious spare time
origins of, I've always been about communication, and I've always believed in Peter Thiel and Blake Masters' concept of, take what's done and that people have to do, want to do, need to do it better, and do it cheaper and make it more accessible. And that's a good place to start. And we've fought for a long time, back from satellite education, the internet, to all this stuff back, how can content, video, it's so important, it's so compelling, but there are still massive places all around the world where bandwidth is an issue, and all of these things tying up are issues, even in, next generation internet and all of these things going on in 5G. There's still these problems always. So as we've gone through this generationally, we looked at where we are right now, and we started asking the question literally in into 2017, 2018, is WebEx sucks. It's 25, 28 years old, but you have all these different, and Zoom is new WebEx. Matter of fact, he used to run WebEx, blah, blah, blah. And you start looking at those things, and we had video and we had communication. We had the ability to do it regardless of bandwidth. We have an enterprise grade. We started developing that, and we said, what we need is just like an ecosystem for the cell phone. You have video like Zoom and WebEx, but then you got to have a learning management system if you're in your company. Then you got to have Vimeo or YouTube, and you got to have Dropbox, and you got to have a way to teach these people how to make shows and editors. You can't do that. You can't, if you're a teacher recording your class on Zoom, unless it's almost impossible to edit. If little Bobby says the F word, guess what? That's in there. There's all kinds of, so we wanted to create a mobile first, a system that unifies, just like the iPhone has done, so to speak, the Android, but has done for the phone. Now the phone on your phone is just another rarely used app, because you're doing all these other things with it. But you pull that together in a unified system, people shouldn't have to know how to do all of that stuff. It should just work. So Arena Edge was created to take all of our experience in those communication platforms all the way back to the things that go back to Skype. Some of that stuff was developed in our world, all the way back to pre-caching, all the way about bandwidth. We were doing more video on the internet than anybody else before YouTube back in 2001 even, we understand that market. We said, how can we bring this together? And we said, and we're looking at things like medical diplomacy, about the whole thing for medicine all over the world. How can you make rural areas be as apt communication-wise and everything? For all of those things tie in. It's not just education, and it's not just entertainment content, it's real stuff. And so these platforms have all been cobbled together. And then the people that develop apps now are just putting this one and this one and this one together, but they're not enterprise grade, and they can't accomplish what's needed to make this one unified platform where all of that can work. And so we just redid and rebuilt and took everything that we had been doing and created that environment. And then COVID comes. And just as we're getting ready to be at that, all of a sudden there's this huge, and now all these companies, WebEx, Cisco didn't invest more in WebEx. Why? Because they didn't have to. They're doing cybersecurity and all that stuff. Why do they need to be doing that? Zoom, all these things are old, antiquated systems. They hadn't been revisited. And COVID, all of a sudden, the teachers are screaming at the CEO of Cisco, like, why does this suck? Why can't we make this and this and this and this? We can't even edit this. Blah, blah, blah. They were all coming up for what we were designing. So we are the right place at the right time with Arena Edge. We can't even say what it does on the website because people, we have it dumbed down on the website. But we have our reach platform and the whole purpose of it. And we're really starting to focus a lot on medical right now just because of a lot of opportunities globally. We're doing things that everyone has a need for nurses and all over the world. And we're doing a thing with Texas A&M and the nursing where we're making that the content. And it's going and it's we've just signed contracts as medical starts to become not just but more diplomacy. I mean, even in China, they're demanding Western medicine now. They used to hide it. When we're doing studios, they would hide Western medicine inside of sound stages so that only the rich people were going in there. But now they've turned that upside down. They're saying we've got to be better at bringing in new equipment, our 23,000 hospitals, because we're going to have a revolt. Our people are demanding Western medicine. They've realized this Eastern stuff isn't cutting it. And so how do they pay for that? They can't. That's how they're doing it. They're saying, okay, you can come in. This is what your Chinese covers, your insurance. But if you want this from the West, you can get it, but you have to pay for it. It's another tax on their wealthy to make them pay. And our platform, I'm not even pro-China, and I say that to them all the time. Our platform is the only one. We just got a license there to even Microsoft Teams, you have to go through. Zoom was kicked out, and they even helped develop it. It was kicked out of China. All those things, you have to go through a VPN, and then if they find you, it's illegal. They cut you off. You're on a company. Imagine all the enterprises that are doing business in China and have operations there. Even the DoD, they can't have video communication unless they use WeChat. So we've got the right because the Chinese want to control. Since ours is a unified platform, they found it. They found us. We didn't find them, and now they want it in all their medical. Well, A&M working on international medical diplomacy. That's the the World Health is
WHO
is compromised. They're saying we need to be doing that, and we're the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. They brought Johns Hopkins, all the best universities, and all the stuff they're doing. They're spending more on technology there than any other of the schools, and so with their content, we're making that the content in our platform that they have to train 8 million nurses in Western, but the Bahamas is another example, and all the islands, going on. All these countries and in the rural counties, even in the U.S., are needing this type of stuff. The enterprises that deal with selling that equipment and then having to train and work, and so we can't do everything, but we're expanding that way. That's what we're doing right now in this company. We just the right place at the right time. We built the right platform, and it's not just cobbled together apps. So much so that the demand for that is starting to become readily apparent. It's just an easier way to do it. And once you start comparing that to and it doesn't have to be we had to dumb it down and make it look like Zoom. We were trying to do too fancy with it, but we make it look like what they expect. But then you start adding. It looks like Netflix plus Zoom. You have all your channels, you have all your stuff, and it makes it easy. Anyway, it's as easy as TV. That's kind of a slogan we wrestled with. And that, to me, is important for education, it's important for communication, and it's important for my retirement. I mean, because with that doing what it's doing and having the contracts, it's starting to get the value of that company, is I think important. I won't go into any more than that, but.
So how do people get in touch with you if they find this compelling and they want to know more?
Well, they can.
How do they find you online or follow you or whatever?
They can go to Johnny Towelboy on Instagram. My name, John Robison, on Instagram under Johnny Towelboy. Is an easy way to get me personally, but they can go track me down at emails j.robison@newrepublicstudios.com, or I don't give my cell phone out, but
no, that's fine. That's good enough.
IG is good to go track down and send messages, or my emails, and then in all seriousness, you can get to that, and someone can help get you in touch with me. So,
John, thank you very much for doing this. We probably could have done twice this very easily, and but that I feel like I would have had to left and come back, and then you would have still been eating those chocolates.
I'm not eating chocolates. There's no
chocolates we're eating here. I'm not Rosie O'Donnell.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.